This hearing of the Senate Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport References Committee, inquiry into opportunities for the development of a hemp industry in Australia. I'm the acting chair, Senator Richard Colbeck. I'm joined in the room by Senator Josh DeLiga. We also have Senator Ross Cadell joining via teleconference. These are public proceedings being audio streamed live via the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript is being made. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated as by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. I remind senators that of their obligations under the Behaviour Code for Australian parliamentarians to treat witnesses with dignity, courtesy, fairness and respect. I remind any committee members of witnesses who are appearing via teleconference today and who are not speaking to mute their microphones and to remember to unmute when they're called on. I now welcome via teleconference Mr Paul Benham, representing the Hemp Plastic Company. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to a Senate committee has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, would you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Paul Benham. I'm appearing not only as an industry veteran, but also as an advisor to various governments around the world, including the US government, corporations via the BioSmart Group. I'm chairman of the Hemp Plastic Company, and I'm also a consultant to Wandara, an industrial hemp company in Queensland, that both have commercial interests in the sector growing. I've also disclosed this in my submission, but what I'm offering the committee today is 30 years of international experience in industrial hemp, and not a pitch for these companies.
Okay. So now, having been through that process, I invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of that, we'll go to colleagues for questions. Over to you, Mr Benham.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned, 30 years I've been working with industrial hemp. I founded the hemp foods industry in the United Kingdom. I founded the hemp foods industry here in Australia, which I started in 1999. I've been here for 27 years. It took me 18 years to lobby the government to change the legislation to allow a health food to be used in Australia to support the Australian people, despite many facts showing that this should have been allowed 27 years ago. I have created businesses in Australia that at their peak became worth $600 million eventually from this, based upon Hemp Foods Australia. I've supported companies working with building, with plastics, with carbon sequestration. I've also supported the textile industry. I have been a representative for the US government, not the Australian government, even though I'm Australian, to the United Nations Committee of COP. I am interested in supporting Australians to grow this industry, which already exists here in Australia, but is a very small niche industry. And there are companies here doing the real work with real Australian farmers, with real Australian businesses, and have a significant potential here for a sustainable, agri-manufacturing and circular economy industry. So the opportunities are significant, and I look forward to questions on how I can support the growth in Australia.
Thank you. I might just go to start with the discussion with respect to the percentage of THC in hemp and the various regulations that exist from state to state, which a number of submissions talk about being an inhibitor to the industry. Tassie, I think at 0.3, another at 0.35, New South Wales being 0.1. Oh, sorry, 1%. How does that stack up internationally, and where would be an appropriate level that would facilitate growth in the industry and also work in terms of international trade? Because this, I mean, you talk about it being an industry that's growing, but still it has its limitations in a global sense, if I'm reading all of the submissions correctly. Yes.
This has been an ongoing issue around the world. So this is, not just an Australian problem, but it has been an Australian problem where we had 0.2%, 0.3%, and then some states started moving to 1%. Globally, we are seeing some companies recently making 2% THC as the ruling. Just to give you some context, because I guess so everyone is clear on what a percentage of THC is and how it affects what is the issue. Why do we have to have a percentage of THC in the first place? It's because THC is the ingredient that is known as being psychoactive and is a very different cousin to the industrial hemp plant. And most people are aware of this now. When I first started in this industry, it required a lot of education. Most people understand the difference between industrial hemp and intoxicating cannabis, which is very different in how it's looked after from a growing and use perspective. When people are growing industrial hemp's cousin, and we'll use the term cannabis or marijuana for simplicity's sake, they are usually growing at around minimum of 20%, but up to 30 to 40% in the flower. There has been studies showing, the safety limits, but obviously 1 or 2% is far from 20 or 30%, which is the minimum that is commercially viable for anyone in the medical cannabis sector to be able to use. So that as a foundation, I will come back to the 0.3 to 1% limits that exist throughout Australia, which has been extremely confusing for the industry and very challenging to work with. The main challenges are that hemp is naturally around 1% in the wild. That's what's on average been understood and found as far as what I've seen around the world. And therefore, if breeders have to grow to 0.3%, then a lot of work has to be done to keep a crop at that number. Where naturally, if there's a drought, if their weather extremes come, or even just natural genetics revert back to its natural state, then that number can creep. So many breeders have created industrial hemp seeds that generally stay around 0.3%, which is, the minimum that the global industry has looked at in the past. But most countries are moving to 1% now. And that is, in my opinion, the minimum THC standard that should exist and should be a federal standard and not a state standard, which is different between different states.
So what was based on your understanding, what was the foundation for going to the 0.3 and 0.35 that exist here in Australia right now? Living in Tasmania as I do, and I think Senator DeLegal might have some questions on this too, but both Tasmanians, there are other industries that are sensitive to any perceptions with respect to hemp and as well. So what was the basis of the 0.3, 0.35 that is currently in place?
Well, it's interesting. My understanding is that the 0.3% figure traces back to a study done in Canada in the 70s. I think it was a Dr. Ernest Small who looked at the difference between what fibre hemp should be and what drug cannabis to be was. And he basically created the 0.3% number, which is kind of somewhat arbitrary because, as I suggested earlier on, 0.31% is very different. It makes no difference to 0.3. Neither does 1% really make any difference from 0.3. The fact is that there is very, very small amount when we're talking up to at least 1%. And there has to be, a number. Modern science is showing globally that the 1% is the normal, is a more reasonable, let's say, threshold. And there's more of a scientific argument where 1% still poses a negligible abuse. And that's, I guess, the critical component of this compared to, as I mentioned earlier, 20 to 30% is the general percentage for medical cannabis. So no one is going to be, for simplicity terms, getting high from a 1% industrial hemp crop. So there is very little scientific basis for 0.3%, as far as I'm aware.
So in trying to maintain a crop at say 0.3 or 0.35, am I right in interpreting what you said as that growing conditions may create some variability in that number?
Exactly, correct.
And so 1% being the more natural base number in the wild would be easier and less risky for managing the product.
That is correct.
Okay. I just want to go on to R&D, and there is a, let's say, modest R&D program that runs through AgriFutures at the moment. What do you see as being required in terms of the possible uplift that might be required to support the development of the sector?
The bottom line is the sector is a very new emerging industry. It has now been proven, and it has been seen as a cottage sector until this time. And the industry is doing its best to move into expansion mode. To do that, I believe it needs support from various agencies, and the agencies that I'm aware who have been looking at this but are not yet have any direction that would appreciate direction are things like the Clean Energy Finance, the National Reconstruction Funds, and probably NACE as well. As well as regular tax incentives to support the foundations for this industry. Things like life cycle analysis which kind of only have to be done once, but for a small emerging industry, cost the new businesses a lot of money, where support by these kind of industries to grow and expand would really help a lot.
So, in terms of what you've seen in the development of your business, which is now exporting elements for plastic manufacture around the world, how do you see the possibility of that sort of opportunity developing in this country, and what sort of investment might be required to make that happen? What sort of dollars are we looking at to see something like that develop into something economically viable in this country?
Your question is sensible and a good question. The answer I wish I could give you was as simple and direct. Ultimately, to create a industry, and if we use the example of my business, which is what you asked and what I have experience with, to bring hemp plastics into Australia, I can give you a number and say, low millions of dollars. I won't give you a specific number right now, but I can say low millions of dollars to create the foundation for that business to make sense here. And as I said, that could be supported through NAIF, National Reconstruction Fund, Clean Energy Finance, etc. Though that's a simple answer and not accurate in my opinion and my experience from supporting, I guess, governments and larger corporations around the world looking to create a hemp industry. And the reason being is part of the reason that hemp is beneficial for agriculture, for manufacturing, is because we are talking about one single plant that can be used for its stalk. It's for the center part of the stalk, which is the hurd, or the bast fiber, and the hurd, and then the flowers, and then the seeds, and the roots. And they all have multiple uses. So you can make building materials, you can make building materials, you can make plastics, you can make food, you can make textiles, you can make paper, and you can make biofuels from one single plant. And it's the multi-use part of this plant that makes this commercially viable. Now, it is commercially viable just for these other uses, but it's not attractive. And not attractive means that no one really wants to invest the millions of dollars to start a new industry for one particular use. So therefore, that's why most small businesses either fail or just don't really push this. Everyone wants this, but no one says, oh, well, great, I'm going to put $2 million into hemp plastics, but hey, then we have all of this other materials to use. Hemp plastics, and the reason I focused my energy after decades in this career was interesting to me because it actually uses the waste material from both the food and building industries. And in my opinion, food, building, and plastics are probably the biggest uses for industrial hemp with the biggest potential today. And we should probably talk a little more about building at some point today. But these three different uses, when using one plant, really take advantage and ensure it's a no-waste crop that can be used in a true agri-manufacturing circular economy. Does that help you?
Look, and it gives me a sense of direction, I suppose, in one sense. Although in our inquiry so far, what's been evident to me at least, I won't speak too for my colleagues, but just looking at the crops that are grown in our home state of Tassie, there are crops that are grown for seed, there are crops that are grown for fibre, and then there are other crops grown for breeding purpose or seed supply purposes. And so are we looking at some level of critical mass of each of those different types to ensure that we get enough capacity of each of the different elements to make the various parts of the industry viable? So, I mean, using as much of the plant as possible is obviously best case scenario, but if you're growing for fibre and herd, you're getting much less seed. And if you're growing for seed, you probably have a shorter plant, less chance of wind throw, and therefore less fibre. But you still need the capacity of the fibre utilisation, particularly as a farmer, to get best return for the crop. So you're talking about having a decent mix in an overall industry sense to make sure that you've got viability. Is that a reasonable assessment?
I can understand how you came across that assessment, though I would say maybe it's a little simpler in some regards. I'll use your analogy. So from a farming perspective, you're correct. There is generally seed crops, fibre crops, and breeding crops. Breeding crops are very small, very specialist, and we'll just leave those out of the mix for a minute because they don't really need that much support, except it's R&D. So its focusing is on the R&D. So breeding is important for Australia, but has also been done for 3 decades now, and we now have seed breeds that work throughout the country successfully. We could always do with more, and they could always get more efficient, and they are doing that I see that happening in other countries, and it does make a difference to the bottom line, because if you're using a crop that gives, say, a yield of 1 and a crop that gives a yield of 1.5 for the same hectareage, obviously makes sense for everybody downstream. And everything starts with the seed variety. So if we put that to the side, you're talking about seed crops and you're talking about fibre crops. Now, seed crops are relatively simple because they are generally grown for seed, and seed quality, for food quality, it's very similar to many grain crops that are standard here in Australia. Again, including, improving the yields from specific breeds make the difference to those seed crops. But it's really when we're talking about the fibre crops, that's when we're talking about the major hectareage potential, the major job creation potential, and the major industry and dollar results for Australia potential, in my opinion. And it is the fibre that needs to grow and have investment in it. And that is where my response came from. My previous response was really around, okay, if you're going to grow for fibre, you're getting fibre and herd predominantly. And you need to have uses for both the fibre and the herd. So most industrial hemp companies grow seed crop and then they grow a fibre crop. But to grow a fibre crop, to grow any crop, in fact, and this is my general advice for farmers who come and say, should I grow industrial hemp? My response is generally no, you shouldn't grow industrial hemp until you have an end use. And that is where my advice will focus on today is saying, well, let's get clear on the end uses that we want to create. And through my experience globally and what I've seen around the world, as I mentioned, it's really the food industry, which is the seed crop, but then the building and the plastics and textiles and maybe, paper industry potentially. But it's mainly, again, building and plastics that have the immediate, short-term, easy wins, low-hanging fruit, opportunities for Australia. So to do that efficiently, we have to have both of those things. Now, there's not many plastic companies that are experts in building, and vice versa. There are not many building companies that are experts in plastic. And that's where the opportunity lies, in my opinion. And that's where the support is required to create the infrastructure to move from the farm to the end product. And the end product being a plastic product or a building product of some form, or one of the other industries. But as I said, they're my two top picks to keep the conversation as simple as and clear as possible today. Okay. So to do that, to move from a fibre crop to an end industry, you not only need the primary processing machinery, which is decortication generally, but then you need the secondary processing, which is turning the materials into suitable plastic products or building products or food products, depending if you're growing a seed crop. And you need to separate those materials and use them efficiently in a blend, which means you can't have one industry growing faster than the other. Otherwise, one material becomes out of balance financially to the other industry. Yeah, does that make sense so far?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. Senator DeLuga.
Thanks very much, Chair. Morning, Mr. Benham. How are you going today?
Good morning.
I would just like to ask, ask a little bit further about your regulatory suggestions in relation to harmonising a national approach for the 1% THC standard. Now, in your submission, that you note that the Senate could consider recommending the development of that national industry hemp standard through COAG or federal legislation to override inconsistencies. What's your experience with the states and territories and their desire to move to that 1% without federal intervention?
My experience is, or at least what I've heard, because I haven't had that much direct experience, but it is, for me, quite logical that if a number exists and a state has, say, start with 0.3%, to move to 1 or 0.35%, whatever it may be, to move to 1% is simply a risk that they don't want to take, because what's the reward? And this is the chicken and egg situation that the industry has found itself in. And this is why we're having two conversations. One about, well, what's the threshold limit? Are we trying to harmonise within Australia? But how are we going to grow the industry? What's the point of increasing to 1%, to grow more hemp if there's not an end use? And if we don't support the end users in some form, whether, and that's pretty much financially, and it's generally what a sector requires, it's quite normal, certainly at this early stages, then we can risk more farmers going, oh great, it's easier to grow now, I have less risk of it creeping from 0.35 to 0.36 and then getting in trouble because they're still going to grow the same varieties. You understand that? So it's not everyone's going to go, oh great, let's grow to 1% now. Everyone's going to still grow the same varieties practically, and they're just going to, if they creep to 0.36%, they're not going to freak out, give up, get scared that they're going to go to jail for growing an agricultural crop. No one needs that stress. Life is challenging enough sometimes for many of these people. So I think, yes, that is the reason why there is no big reason for states to move to the harmonisation of 1%, and I believe requires federal intervention.
Because you believe it requires federal intervention because there are some states that are just unwilling to move, even though from what I take has been presented to the committee, there's pretty good reason to move to that 1% with very little risk. But okay. Yeah, that is my personal assessment. But again, you'd have to speak with the states directly to get their direct opinions. And when it comes to just relation to, and it's Senator Colbeck and I have been on very similar tangents with our questioning this morning in relation to AgriFutures and your work with them. Can you tell us about how your company has specifically engaged with AgriFutures' work to date? And obviously, there's been that $2.5 million research program. Can you just let us know how you've engaged with AgriFutures and what that experience has been like?
I have not directly been working with AgriFutures, is the honest answer. I am aware of their work and their good work, if I may say so. And I recognise, part of their challenges were the THC percentage not moving forward. But I also recognise that they came to very similar conclusions that I guess I could have shared regarding the potential economic benefits once the foundations have been set. So I think they're doing, again, because I've been doing it for a long time and it's been a little frustrating for me. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to talk with you directly and to share my experiences, but I wish I had had this opportunity 20 years ago. Instead, the US government, the African government, the Asian governments have called on me for support, and I've helped them build their industries to a much larger number than where it would have found in Australia because they were willing. So I think we have a lot of the basic understanding of what the potential is for this industry. And there are now a few places in the world that are actually putting this into place and making this work and making this happen. And as I said, the reason for that is, partly down to, THC is really focused on supporting the farming side of things. And I think that's a really important foundation. And I don't believe it is the most integral part of the changes that need to happen. I believe the most important part of the changes that need to happen is that we see this industry as a whole. We do not support any one specific part. We don't support just foods. We don't support just plastics. We don't support just buildings. But we look at them as a whole and see how we can actually move to have the basic infrastructure within Australia so that the companies can actually move forward. So, for example, one large decortication facility in Australia can support many businesses working in different industries. But that foundation and infrastructure is not going to be set up well, and that's the key part as well, because there's many people who are trying in Australia, have been trying for many years, and I've seen this happen globally around the world too, to do this in a more cost-effective fashion, which generally fails, which generally puts off farmers to get involved with this again. And I've been seeing this circle happening now over my career, and I hope I don't sound too frustrated, but I feel for these people who are investing their time, their families' income for a better future, yet fail because of the lack of foresight in doing and creating the foundational support for the entire industry.
No.
So, yeah.
Your frustration is noted, of course, and this committee had the opportunity to visit many different businesses across regional Tasmania going back a couple of months ago, and we see the innovation and we see the opportunities that are available from the industry. So I understand, you say it's 20 years too late, but I think there's the industry has got friends in this committee, and we want to work with you on how we can get some benefits and how we can push this further. When it comes to your company, the hemp plastic company, you mentioned that you currently export hemp plastic resins from the US to Australian customers. What can you tell us about the current scale of trade into Australia at the moment?
It's very, very small in Australia at this time, and that's mainly relating to freight. Ultimately, plastics is a commodity, and my goal as representative of the hemp plastic company, our goal as a hemp plastic company is to not export from the US to anywhere. In fact, we're willing to export to set up and prove different customers and industries. So again, that's where support could be helpful, is to get some plastic materials into Australia, into end customers, which are generally injection molders, to give them materials so that they can do some R&D trials, create products that make sense. And in the plastics industry, that's a long life cycle time from customer acquisition to a first sale, and it can be a year or more sometimes, and that costs money. And no one in Australia wants to do that because it's not commercially viable to export from the US to Australia. So our goal is to actually license out our technology globally, and we are having those conversations in the Middle East, in Europe, in Asia, and we have started having those conversations in Australia with some of the larger companies here. But again, no one is willing to invest at this time in importing or buying a license for our technology that we have spent decades in creating and all the patents we've created, because the infrastructure doesn't exist in Australia. And that's where we go round in a circle. We go, well, if there's no decortication and there's no building industry that's grown large enough yet, then why should we invest in a technology for a plastic product that we then have to build the infrastructure for, that relies on the infrastructure for building and foods to create a business that takes a year to get a customer?
Look,
So I hope that makes sense. It's kind of, for me, it's simple, but it sounds complicated because there's a lot of reliances, and that's where we need support.
Thank you very much. I'm losing the call, but thanks for appearing today, and thanks for your very detailed submission as well.
Thank you for listening and your time. I appreciate your support.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Cadell.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. I'm new to this, so thank you for your evidence. I'm catching up. It's a new committee for me. Going through and reading a lot about this, there is a significant price differential between the hemp plastics and other natural plastics. Is that just due to economies of size? Do you think, if you had better decortation technology, if you had broader scale farming, if you had these things, does that get fixed, or does it need market intervention as well?
No, it does not need market intervention as well, though it's at the beginning of an industry. Of course, that is always supportive, and that's what happens normally in most industries, and I think hemp would appreciate some of that. The industrial hemp industry would appreciate that. And your point is well taken. Yes, today hemp plastics are more expensive than regular plastics in general. But again, saying the word plastic is a confusing term for many people because there are thousands of types of plastic.
Yep.
And at most of our larger customers, they all want a very specific formulation that we have to develop for them. And that takes going back and forth many times. Like an automotive business in the US wants different strengths, UV, temperature effects, and they'll go back and forth many times until they get a formula that they want, for example. I can give you an example that within the municipal water treatment industry in Australia, we are looking to enter, one of our customers is looking to enter this market here in Australia and is interested in us creating a manufacturing facility here because it makes sense, because the product that we can produce is cheaper and better than existing materials that are not hemp plastics here today. So there is absolutely commercially viable products, is my point, that are absolutely at scale. And yes, to answer the other part of your question, is will scale make a difference? Yes, it will, is a very simple answer to that. It is all about scale, in fact.
Is there I've not seen anywhere in reading, I've not read anything, going to be honest, I've read about half of all the submissions to this committee only so far. But is there a number where we think that scale and that sustainability is there, where the industry is of size, where it can innovate, it can find those economies of size and get better?
That's a great question, and it is something I have been working most of my career in getting to an answer for. And I would suggest that we are talking, and the best way to answer that is more in hectareage. Yep. So really, we are looking at minimum of 5,000 and 50,000 and up to 50,000 hectares to get to full, I guess, economies of scale. So if there was 50,000 hectares grown in say central Queensland, or central Tasmania or eastern Tasmania, or wherever you want to say, then that is probably the level where you don't have to go any further. 5,000 hectares is a level where it's commercially viable from my studies. And we've done that through the BioSmart group recently for a country that doesn't have an industrial hemp industry, had basically said, look, we don't have a budget. Whatever money you want to spend, you just tell us what is viable. So we were able to look in that study about what was required. And as I said, it requires multiple industries, multiple capex to start with. And then between 5,000, you would start with 50 hectares, 500 hectares, and we're already past in Australia now, but we need to get to the 5,000 and then 50,000 hectares to start seeing really the commercial potential for what Australia can produce for itself and what it can also export to its Asian neighbours.
I thought I read, and you can check me on this, Tasmania's got like 1,700 hectares at the moment. That's 46% of Australia. Is that puts us somewhere just under 4,000 hectares? Is that right?
That is correct. I'm not sure the exact number, sorry, but that's approximately correct. And that's why I'm saying we are not there yet. We are just moving from the proving that we can do this to expanding scale. And it is the expansion scale that all my answers, I guess, are focused on now. We need to, in my opinion, the industry needs to be supported to have that basic infrastructure for each of these industries, not just support farming, which is very important, of course, as well.
So on the expansion scale, are there varieties, obviously Tasmania and our two Tasmanian senators representing the state very well today, you've mentioned Queensland just then, different varieties for different areas. Water use is an issue. We start competing with irrigation things. I know it's competitive with cotton per hectare over length of time of crop. Are we looking at those the actual farming issues around those things of getting access to water in those areas and varieties?
That's a good question. So there is definitely different varietal needs from, say, Queensland to Tasmania, quite significantly. But in terms of using water, we're not just competitive with cotton. We're a tenth, approximately, of the water usage per kilo of hemp fibre to cotton fibre, for example.
But it's about per hectare the same, isn't it, though, if we're talking about the same hectare rate?
Per hectare rate of water, I'm not 100% sure that number.
Oh, don't worry about it. We'll get it later.
Yeah. But I'm pretty sure it is still less, though, in my understanding. But I'm just having a look here at my record. It approximately half the amount of cotton, half the amount of water hemp uses per hectare to the use of cotton. Right. So that's about 50%. So it's still significantly better. And there are varieties, which is hence the breeding question. Can we improve that? Yes, we can. Can we create varieties that require less water and more dry land cropping? Yes, we can. And a lot of work has been done by good Australian breeders for that over the many years. I've seen that improve significantly. So I'm just giving you approximate numbers today.
That's great. I know looking at time, I have to move on. So is there a country who is doing this the best that we should be looking at, or is everyone not great at the moment?
America has recently been improving quite significantly because they've had a lot of, again, financial support. The US has been putting a lot of money behind their industry. and allowing them to really invest. So I am seeing their yields increase quite significantly in terms of farming and primary processing. Building work is happening great in Europe. So there's not one country. It depends. Again, there's different countries for different uses that I would suggest we focus in. So if you give me a specific list of things that you want to look at, I can give you a specific list of companies within the countries to look at as well, independently. So I can do that offline.
If I give you that, just specialised support machinery, like is there something that's specialising in the decortication technology specifically for hemp plants and things like that? Are there innovations where people are investing in the machines that make them more efficient?
Yes, absolutely. There is great company. There's a couple of great companies, one in the US and one in Europe, that I can definitely recommend for some of the best decortication facilities that are being used in large scale in Europe and in the US today. And that's what that's how it should be done, in my opinion. And that's not what we're doing here. We are doing mid-level at the best. And generally have been trying to do shortcuts because the industry has been so small here. And I think a decent investment in one or two decortication facilities in Australia will make all the difference. And that has been an ongoing question and answer since for the entire decade that I've been working here, 2 decades.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benham. I think we probably could have gone on for longer, but we do have to move to other witnesses. Can I thank you for your submission? Thank you for your time. If there are any questions that you've taken on notice, if we could have those by Friday the 8th of May, or if there's any other information that you think that you would like to submit to the committee. Thank you for your evidence.
No problem. I thank you for your time. I appreciate you looking into this industry diligently, and I'm available for follow-up and supporting the Australian public in the best way I can. Thank you.
Thank you. I now welcome representatives from Latrobe University. Now welcome Dr. David Fleming Munoz.
Yeah.
Okay. And Professor Monica Doblin, representing Latrobe University. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, would you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Professor Monica Doblin. I'm a plant scientist based at Latrobe University.
I'm David Fleming Munoz. I'm a professor of agriculture and resource economics at the business school in Latrobe University.
Thank you. I would now invite you to make an opening statement and then we'll move to questions from colleagues.
Perhaps I can start.
Sure.
So I have been a plant scientist for my entire career and have moved to Latrobe a number of years ago because Latrobe is very interested in sustainable food and agriculture. So both David and I are part of the Latrobe Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Food. I'm also now the director of a protected cropping hub, which has followed from an investment in a medicinal agriculture hub. So we have had a number of years working with the hemp and medicinal cannabis industries. And we do research related both to the economic sort of evaluation, I guess, of not only the hemp industry, but others. So life cycle analysis and so on, which is David's area of expertise, and I work more in the molecular sciences. So we've been looking to discover genes underlying traits in both hemp and medicinal cannabis. We have focused quite a lot on plant cultivation and essentially enhancing yield and I guess, traits within cannabis. And we also doing breeding, both of the traditional sort, but also through gene biotechnology, so making transgenic plants through genetic transformation, and now looking at waste valorisation. So the medicinal cannabis industry, of course, collect flowers, obviously to make sort of medicinal products, but there's a lot of biomass waste, and at the moment that is needed to be sort of got rid of either through incineration or rendered sort of not able to be extracted, and so it's mixed with other agricultural waste, and that seems to be a huge waste, and so we are working with the industry to see whether we can come up with better solutions so we can actually produce additional byproducts to offset the inputs that are required, and that's particularly onerous in terms of the regulations associated with holding medicinal cannabis and also for hemp. So we are subject to the same regulations as growers and manufacturers if we're making products, and so quite a lot of our research dollars are actually around the compliance aspects. So yes, we've been working, I guess, with cannabis for a number of years. It has a very interesting biology, but there's much still to be done, I think, to build an industry on both sides, both in the hemp industry and medicinal cannabis.
Thank you.
Personally, I joined Latrobe University 2 years ago. Before that, I worked at CSRO, and my research career has always focused on research development issues from an economics point of view. So I try to bring the broader perspective of issues facing different regions in Australia in terms of development. And when I joined Latrobe, there was a small project already in place with a couple of colleagues from the business school where they were doing like a prospective study to understand better the hempcrete industry in Australia. And as a product of that little project, we submitted the part of the findings of the project, the response to the parliamentary inquiry. And we have been engaged with the industry a little bit to try to go ahead and try to expand this project. So we are currently, maybe to declare that we are currently applying to the ERC linkage program to try to get some funding to actually provide more and better research and data for all the different dynamics of the hemp industry in Australia to understand better the cost competitiveness of or potentially modular hemp panels in the country.
Could you just repeat that last bit for me? Of what sort of panels did you say?
The hempcrete.
Oh, hempcrete.
Modular
Yeah,
panels. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. In terms of development of the product from a plant breeding perspective with respect to yields, where do we sit in the overall scheme of things here? I think when we were in doing a field trip in Tassie, a lot of the seed being utilised and the breeding was coming out of Canada, if my memory is correct. This is recalling my visit to the conference held at Latrobe University last year. A lot of conversation there around the different plant types and their sensitivity to various climes here in Australia. So where is that work sort of sitting at the moment, and to what level of advancement in terms of the progress of the industry itself?
It's a good question. I think agri-futures are still continuing with their variety trials. Those varieties, to the best of my knowledge, have been developed elsewhere and not in Australia. I think the performance is, let's say, reasonable. It's not like we have terribly performing varieties, but I would say what is happening in Australia is sort of quite low, well, small scale in terms of breeding. Do we have, well-suited varieties across all of the different climate types and soils in Australia? I don't think so. And that would be what would be required if we were to, say, geographically distribute hemp growing across the country. So, the previous speaker talked about differences with Queensland and Tasmania. That's obvious. And variety trials are happening around the country. I think they're obviously relatively small scale, and the plan is complex. Growing outdoors, it's obviously subject to lots of environmental conditions that vary across different years. And so it needs sort of multi-year trials of a scale that I guess does take into account the variability that we have in our growing regions. That said, I think I've visited a trial down in Gippsland, and the yields seem perfectly adequate. It's fast growing. We can get 2 crops a year, around 100 days per crop. So it obviously grows quickly and has the potential to be, outperform cotton in terms of the amount of biomass, amount of fibre that we can gather per cropping cycle. So, as I said, small scale, probably niche, if you like. There are some industry players who do breeding, but I don't know how extensive that is and whether there's uptake of those varieties across Australia to really to essentially have the scale across the different growing regions.
So, in terms of let's say fitting it into our agricultural system, and a question probably goes to both of you to a certain extent, because this is about farmers making a return out of it, and therefore those that are contracting its growing or growing it for the next stage process, whether that be for fibre or for seed. The submissions would indicate that it plays a pretty sensible role in that overall growing cycle, or as a plant in a farm management plan, if you like. Mm-hmm. So what sort of scale and what needs, what are going to be the drivers in terms of the economics of that? We've got the regulatory piece that we've talked about, but also the development of the various uses. Where do we need, and it's seriously chicken and egg obviously at the moment. What are the elements that we need to be pushing along with? Is it starting with things like the common THC level, some work on standards for building products, and some of the other things around that would permit utilisation of the whole of the plant, animal feed, bedding, those sorts of things that start to generate the base economics?
Look, I think it is a chicken and egg proposition. You need industry pull. Farmers need to grow a product and then be assured, I guess, that they can sell it. Yep. And in Australia, I don't think that's really established. We're small scale. So far as I'm aware, we don't have decortication facilities that essentially do anything more than hand feeding. What we've seen is pretty basic. It is, and so the scale is not there to do that. That means there's variable quality in the herd and the fibre that's separated through those small scale machines. And so, if there's no industry pull, then a farmer isn't incentivised to grow it. So I think it does need industry pull, and to your point around regulations around building products, I think that's a massive problem, because I don't think that's an easy thing to do. It's expensive. The hemp industry is small, and registering products, to meet standards, is it's expensive for farmers. That it's not going to happen. It has to be through industry-led activity, and that needs investment. And so, if there was, standards for particular products, if there was endorsement, if you like, from the building. Industry to use those products, that would create some pull, and that they're safe, etc. That would obviously help. And by having a large manufacturer use hemp products, then that would absolutely mean that there would be scale, and farmers would be incentivised to grow hemp. You're right; it does provide a diversification crop. I don't think we really quite know yet how it works in the Australian system. I think the legume, cereal kind of rotation is well known, but I don't know whether that's really very well known for hemp yet. I think more research needs to be done. Certainly need industry pull. I think, to incentivise farmers, they really need an assurance that, the products that they're making are going to be, manufactured into products that can be used and they can actually gain a profit from. Otherwise, they'd grow something else.
Okay.
Not much to add to that, because I think it's very clear what is the chicken and egg issue here, right? So definitely the demand side of things is quite critical and important for the development of the industry. So I think more research is needed to understand better what sort of incentives we can place on demand. We talk a lot about standards and certification, which I think is a critical element, and we need to keep exploring opportunities and what we can do about it. But there also like the role of government, right, in terms of public construction, public housing, and even the development of large infrastructure projects like highways, and when you put barrier sounds and things like that. There are great opportunities to use hemp-based products. So I think if we can maybe start incentivizing the demand from that side and put very clear signs from the public point of view, from the government point of view, in terms of potential demand, right, coming from public infrastructure projects, for instance, that can help a lot the industry in terms of provide very clear signs on how the demand can be built in the country, and then, of course, expanding that to other type of projects. So I think that's a critical component here. But I think a lot can be done and explore different opportunities from the demand side.
Are there any products we've had a conversation already about plastics, but are there any products or places globally where we should look to who are leading the charge in this space?
I think France is one of the best case probably in the world, right, because they have a very well advanced industry. And to my understanding, they are public infrastructure in France actually have a strong certification in terms of embodied carbon and green materials that needs to be used. And the US as well, they have very strong regulation in terms of green certification in public infrastructure type of projects. In the US, probably it's not as well as advanced as in France, but France is definitely probably the case that we need to be very aware of. I mean, I know that some colleagues have explored very well the case of France, but it's a good example in terms of how to develop the industry, probably in terms of fomenting demand, in terms of good regulation and certification for hemp-based products. The Netherlands also, I think, has very good standards about it. Not sure what anything else is there.
I don't think so. They're the leaders.
Okay. Senator DeLuca.
Thanks very much. I've kind of got one sort of block of questions for you today. Thanks for your submission. In your submission, you proposed the National Hemp Innovation Hub. Can you tell the committee about how you would complement the existing work that AgriFutures has been doing under the Australian Industrial Hemp Strategic RD&E Plan?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar, I guess, with anything beyond the field trials, if you like, but I think, it's key. I mean, we do it as researchers. We need to collaborate to enable all of the parts of the industry to connect and to get the value across the supply chain, I guess, that we're wanting. So farmers obviously get a piece of the pie as well as the manufacturers and so on. An innovation hub, I guess, would be that centre by which people can, who are in the industry, everyone from researchers to manufacturers and growers, etc., can come together and coordinate activities. So, a farmer might grow a particular variety, and that could be trialled to manufacture some sort of product. And by, I guess, having everyone together and connected, it means that the best person placed to do the next step is part of that process. I think the other thing coming from a university perspective is the training, the education and training piece is critical. For the industry to grow, they need skilled workers. It's not just cultivation in field, it's all of the manufacturing, which is fairly specialised. And so that needs to be integrated to enable those people who we're training at university to then move into the industry. So that, I think, is critical to that piece. So it is, yes, bringing all of those plays together and working with agri-futures so that if things are grown, that research can happen alongside that and that we can get more value from the investment already within those trials. So that takes coordination and effort, but I think the industry are really trying to pull together and really have been trying to work together to enable this scaling and to build the momentum around the hemp industry. So I think that would really help consolidate investment, but also then help it grow and enable the scaling.
And Doctor, I don't know whether you wanted to add to that answer or did you?
No, I think it's,
no.
yeah. I mean, I think the science of hemp, we can call it like that, is well advanced in the country. I think there's a lot of opportunities to keep going and growing the industry from the supply side. But again, bringing back to the demand side, I think is quite critical. So I think the processing facilities and all the demand side, why not, can also be included in some sort of innovation hub, right? Where we can bring case studies, bring expertise, bring the experiences of the different people actually building houses using hempcrete materials and experiences and share that knowledge and try to kind of create more coordination in the industry.
So you're proposing that that hub would complement the work that AgriFutures is doing?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm working with them, I guess.
Yeah,
across,
it's not just the growing, it's also the manufacturing and really bringing that together. So those are close by and that, people can kind of see what the products are that they're trying to, innovate and grow.
Thank you. That's all I have to ask today.
So in the context of the hub, what would you say the key attributes of that? So rather than saying we're growing a bit of hemp here, so this is where we put the hub, what are the key attributes that you would see to the hub in terms of making it work? Obviously, proximity to where you can grow the product, but you also have on the other side of it the products coming out of the manufacturing process, if they were to be developed, their proximity to the appropriate market as well. So if we were looking at saying, okay, we think this is a good path to go, what would we list as the key attributes of an innovation hub to support the development of the hemp industry in this country?
I think, receiving goods, I suppose. Really kind of having it like a manufacturing plant in a way, that it's not too large scale. It's not supposed to be a commercial facility, but it is a big enough pilot facility, if you like, that would enable product to come in one end and essentially be processed, so decorticated, and then the secondary manufacturing to occur, and in a way have a range of different equipment available to enable different products to be made, to test things. So I know, there was, I guess, a potential use of cotton gins in a way to decorticate. And okay, yes, they do the job, but not well. And okay, so we're I guess, trying to centralise equipment in a way, and essentially innovation is trying things, and so that would be really a test bed of being able to do that. So you would have, researchers, students, industry, all coming together and using the same space, holding workshops, that sort of thing. So it would just be, equipment, space, technical personnel, and the hub would be coordinating that activity. Simply.
David?
I'm not sure what more in terms of attributes for a potential hub, but I was thinking. I mean, of course, the hemp industry, hemp industrial processes and manufacturing, it should be very local, right? As you say, that distances in Australia are always a barrier. So it's very.
That's why I put that part into it, because proximity is a genuine issue.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of conversations about utilising biomass for different purposes, and there are ranges of operation where it's economically viable, and so probably 100 to 150k radius is for the growing to a processing, manufacturing, whatever, is about the limit, and that goes for a whole range of different things, whether that's cotton, rice, biomass, timber, a whole range of things. That's about a range. So your comment in relation to how big this country is certainly relevant to that. Which is why I made that point, because that's an attribute,
Definitely,
as I would see.
Yep.
So that's adding to all of those other things, and then of course proximity to market is also an element in the overall cost, and if the current circumstance we're living in is teaching us anything, maybe more so. So I mean, it has to be about the numbers at the end of the day as well. Is that a fair?
I think it is. I think we noted in our submission that the opportunity for regional development is great here. Where for example in Gippsland, the timber industry. I mean the population that's involved in that need to pivot and do something else, and this would lend itself to that type of thing. Where infrastructure is already positioned, where I guess there are transport hubs, etc. nearby. Of course, all of that lends itself to having something in that location. So it's really sort of, I guess, making the taxpayer's dollar work harder in an investment setting to enable the industry to grow. So I think we all want that. As researchers, we try and do that too through our collaboration. And so, yeah, I think the industry itself is a collaborative industry, but it does need assistance to enable this scaling, and it does need some investment, not just in one area, but I guess in a number, as Paul mentioned, to bring that together. So
there was, I'm not sure whether it was your submission or not, but there was reference to something like a CRC in one of the submissions that I was reading. Would you see some benefit in something of that nature which draws all form of industry partners into the system? You talked about the collaborative nature of the industry, but also some potential end users of product that value the attributes that it brings, as a mechanism for the sector to take a step.
I do, and I think what is, I guess, useful of a CRC is the longer term sort of time frame of that investment, which would enable us to essentially work along the value chain, both from growing in yield and that sort of thing, quality of product right through to manufacture. So yes, I could see that a CRC type scenario could benefit. And
could bring in some of the things like development of standards and
Absolutely.
Those things that provide the confidence in the product that has been talked about.
Yeah, that would be embedded. Yeah, that would need to be embedded in that. Yeah.
Maybe, Senator, if you could let me add a little bit about that CRC option, which I think is very interesting and it's definitely a potential. I just would like to emphasize here that we need to understand the government also as a key industry player here, not just as an industry providing support for research and development in funding through a CRC, for instance, but actually as a consumer of hempcrete products or industrial hemp products, right? Because, again, large infrastructure projects, public infrastructure projects, they can be using a lot more hemp-based products. So as a consumer of potential materials coming from the industry, also it's important to highlight that the government needs to be present there. Not just the federal government, but state governments.
Well, that's one of the functions of the CRC, and when you mentioned sound attenuation, for example, for major highway infrastructure projects, my ears did prick up immediately because hemp would be a product that could provide, I think, some definite attributes in terms of what it brings from a number of different perspectives. So if you're building a concrete barrier versus a hempcrete barrier, carbon storage, for example, being the first thing, but also the noise attenuation being the second, which is the core purpose of the piece of infrastructure. So there are interests that would benefit from engagement in that sort of structure and therefore driving some demand, which is what we talked about at the outset. Senator Cadell.
Thank you, Chair. In the previous witness, I talked about varieties and different areas of Australia and scope for the expansion of the product. Professor Doblin, you said something about more trials needed for different varieties in Australia. How far are we going along that, and what would you like to see?
I mean, I have been following, I guess, the outputs of those trials. I think the RD&E plan is coming to an end at the end of next year, and I guess I'm not quite sure what's next on the horizon. But as I said, I think most of the varieties that are in those trials have come from elsewhere, and they haven't been, let's say, bred in Australia for Australian conditions. There's certainly a lot of germplasm available internationally. I'm not close enough, if you like, to know why those varieties were selected. But I think to Senator Colbeck's sort of mention of sort of regions, if we're really trying to, let's say, have regions of hemp cultivation, then we need to make sure, I guess, those trials are happening in those areas, or the I guess that are best suited for that activity. And as I said, I'm not sure, whether that has what the thought process is, or how those varieties are selected, if you like, if they're the best in the, let's say, in the locations in which hemp is grown currently. We would like to do more in the space. We haven't done as much in that breeding space, but there's a huge amount of diversity in hemp. And I think what we also need to kind of focus on is yield stability. So having robust varieties that perform similarly, and that we understand a bit more about how yield and quality of product changes when there is a wet summer or when there's a very dry summer. And so that future-proofing of the industry, I'm not sure we're really to that sort of level. We are going to have a hotter and drier climate into the future, and we need to keep that in mind. If we're trying to grow an industry in Australia, we need to be mindful that, what the weather patterns are today perhaps not going to be what they are into the future. And I think I'm a climate realist. There is climate change happening, and I think we need to be aware of that and that play a role in the future planning and how we do research and do more trials and so on into the future. We're not just looking at yield, if you like, under best conditions, but also under future climate conditions. If that partly,
you said the industry's cooperative and they are working together on these things. Is there a real science, Senator Colbeck's talking about CRC, but is there a real science-led approach to quantitatively review these strains, review these changes and practices and see what's working, or is it really too small for that yet?
It's a good question. I'm not close enough to the AgriFuture trials to know that, but I mean they are. I'm hoping being done under robust scientific methodology. I think there's always more that you can gather from the data. Digital technologies, drones, etc. I think we need to be looking towards using new tools to enable us to gather information across regions, across sort of distances under different weather conditions, to integrate, I guess, what data we are gathering now, and looking to see whether we can get as much information of when we're growing material as we can. So I think more could be done essentially with the trials, and we could gather further information that would be useful to the industry. And I'm talking about things like obviously non-invasive technologies that yes require compute power and digital tech, but is in a way cheaper than the destructive molecular-based technologies, I guess, that we do use to characterise plant material currently.
It just came into my head, and this might be a question, knowing you've given the disclosure at some distance from the trials. Does Australia have any particular novel pests or parasites or dangers to the hemp plants in Australia?
We've got our fair share. I mean, hemp itself is generally quite resilient because of the specialised metabolites that it makes. So, it does definitely have pests and pathogens that impact it, and in like all monocultures that can be problematic. But I guess part of our research is also to look at that to make more resilient and resistant, disease-resistant varieties. So that's part of, I think, the breeding program that comes into the future. I don't know how well the material that is in the trials is characterised in that manner.
Because that's something that really only comes with size and different environments, because Australia has something that will kill everything. We're good like that, but until it's everywhere, we won't know, will we?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just in terms of some of the other attributes, and I've sort of touched on them a little bit in relation to carbon credits and things of that nature. Is there any work that demonstrates the values that could be supported there? I've made the comparison between, say, a concrete sand attenuation barrier and a hempcrete-based one. Are there any places that we could look, or are there any information that might be available that would support some of those values? I mean, we've been talking in a different forum, this committee, through estimates to the Australian Rail Track Corporation, for example, in relation to how they're mitigating their carbon footprint. This is something in a different scope slightly, but still major infrastructure. Is there any data we could look to in that sense?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
In terms of valuation of embodied carbon, I mean, we know the characteristics of hemp and how much they can capture, right, like per ton and things like that. But in terms of like a full life cycle analysis of valuation of carbon embedded in products, I'm not aware of a particular study about it. Maybe the Hemp Council knows better than the next witnesses, but I'm not aware of. And that's kind of, in some extent, our next research is about, actually. In Latrobe, we went to run a small project that tried to provide much and better data to understand, right, all the benefits from the, especially hempcrete modular panels as a potential alternative for industrial hemp. So yeah, that's what we want to do next, kind of bring in more and better data about it, which would involve actually look at international experiences. What is the analysis has been done in France and the US especially, and I scale it to Australia and try to understand with different type of cost curve simulations, try to understand a little bit better how much actually is the cost-benefit ratio of these products to how the market is operating now.
So the answers to a lot of these questions are still the things that are being developed by the industry globally, not just here in Australia. And so part of the research work, if you like, that's required to develop the industry is also answering some of these questions.
I think so, yes. Yeah, we've got completely different climates. Hemp has been used for cleaning up, so phytoremediation. None of that type of work has been done in Australia, yet we would clearly have benefit in cleaning up mine sites, for example, using hemp. There's obviously the stigma around the use of it too. So I think, do we have local evidence, if you like, of its performance? We don't, and that is, we need to gather that, even though, yes, I guess evidence from elsewhere would suggest that it is carbon negative. It is, it is a product that could help make the building industry more, move it towards net zero. It's, currently very hungry in terms of its use of CO2, generation of CO2. So I think, we would love to be able to provide some actual evidence that, yes, hemp is a solid performer when it comes to making a more sustainable, circular bioeconomy.
And just to add, just a small thing here is that these sort of evaluations can be done and are always done right to evaluate different things in the economy, in the circular economy, and what is the value of sustainability and recycling and things like that. But there are different ways of doing it. But the point is that, some research needs to be done. But what we are really sure are that the attributes of hempcrete and heavy industrial products in general, that they are definitely sustainable, right? Because they're coming from an amazing plant like hemp. But also about all the life cycle analysis and carbon capture and all those qualities are there. And for instance, just bringing back the example of soundproof barriers for highways. Right, they have a lot of qualities. Maybe we don't have a dollar values put on them yet, but they can be done. And there are always things that we need to include in the life cycle analysis of a circular economy perspective. Even when we talk about a product like that, when we say when is the end of the life of the product, just, for instance, the recycling of these materials has been proved that hempcrete materials are much, much easier to recycle than cement or other type of products being used in these barriers. So if you add that component, all the benefits of hempcrete and hemp industry products will increase for sure. It's just a matter of let the public know, let the politicians know that the benefits are there, they can be valued, and the potential is clear economically.
And develop the systems that support all of that information, which is, at this stage, developing at best. Very early stage. I just want to go back to the comment that you made in relation to byproduct from medicinal cannabis, which is, and how in a regulatory sense you see we might manage that. It's quite a different product, and in terms of how it might be seen, going to the stigma point, in relation to the industrial product, which I think a lot of the stigma is now coming away from, and being much more readily accepted in the agricultural sector, but also the broader community. How do you see that other byproduct being appropriately handled or managed? Because, as you quite rightly say, at the moment its disposal is a genuine cost to the medicinal cannabis sector, and that does fit within our terms of reference. How do you see an appropriate way of managing that the genuine or perceived threats
Yeah.
can be appropriately handled.
Yeah, even looking at the sort of the phytoremediation studies that have happened in Europe, for example, in different varieties, the cannabinoid content varies in different plant parts, and so that needs thorough assessment. So we have highest concentrations of THC in the flower, but in the stem that is much less, as is the seed. So I think it's really understanding, well, what are the drivers for changing that in a plant? Is it always that the stem is of low THC content? But really understanding, well, what happens, I guess, under conditions in which medicinal cannabis is grown. And so really understanding, well, is it really a massive risk? And then how that material is processed. For example, retting might use some sort of an acid or a base. Those those chemical treatments also break down cannabinoids. So it's perhaps not as risky as one would think, but it needs to be monitored and tested.
As long as the processes that support it are managed appropriately.
Correct. That's right.
To deal with the risks.
That's right. So I think there's a possible way, and of course, for example, the fibre from a medicinal cannabis plant is probably not as good as those from a hemp plant, which has been grown for fibre, but it can be used for low-value products, cardboard and paper and so on. So I think it really just offsets. I mean, it's a possibility to offset the high costs of I guess building a potential sort of indoor growth facility. And yeah, it just enables the diversification of product, and then that we're really not wasting biomass, which is actually really valuable. So enabling innovation, but being aware of the risks and
effectively rendering it inert in a
correct
THC sense.
That's right.
Or risk sense.
That's right.
But then being able to embody it in something that takes advantage of its availability.
Correct. That's right.
Okay. All right.
Maybe just, as a note, probably it's a personal point of view, different to yours, that maybe we need to treat this as a totally separate industries, right? So de-risk, right, the development of the industry. That's my opinion, because if we talk about medicinal cannabis, there's going to be a lot of other concerns and issues that have been probably raised here. The byproduct of that maybe can be treated separately, but industrial hemp, probably we should treat it as a different industry with different varieties, different plants that are totally different from medicinal cannabis. So we treat them separately. We keep them like separated for now, for instance, to de-risk any potential initial development. I think is probably a good idea. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the volumes. The volumes, in-field volumes are just way different, and so I think we're thinking in the medicinal cannabis area. I mean, you might have a 30,000 hectare glass house, like a large glass house, but that would still, it's still, all of that material is under regulations. But what can you do, on site, if you like, to enable you to use that material and not just sort of compost it on site? There's a lot more we can do than just composting, and so it's really trying to utilise what is being grown and make it work harder. I mean, you've heard, hemp is a multi-use crop. There's lots of innovation that can occur in that space, and I think, enabling manufacturers to, I guess, use that biomass in a way that, yes, meets the risk mitigation, etc. It's an I think it's an opportunity, if you like, to kind of really.
And of course, plant breeding, and as we've seen for the various different growth use types, are breeding plants that are more appropriate to that use. So even the medicinal cannabis plants are being grown to promote flower and head, not stalk and leaf.
That's right.
And similarly with plants grown for seed are grown to promote seed production rather than stalk and leaf.
That's right.
So they will have their various attributes, but in terms of the fibre, that's the scale part of the sector.
Yep, correct.
And brings the other attributes that perhaps the others can take advantage of.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. All right, look, thank you. Thanks for your evidence today. We very much appreciate your submission and your evidence. If there's any questions that you've taken on notice, we ask that you have that information back to us by the 8th of May. We'll now take a short break and resume at 11:30. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
welcome back, everybody. I think Senator Cadell will be on in a moment. Yep. I now welcome Mr Charles Caves, representing the Australian Industrial Hemp Alliance, and via teleconference Mr Darren Christie, representing iHemp Victoria. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, would you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
I'm Charles Caves, President of the Australian Industrial Hemp Alliance.
Mr Christie.
Darren Christie, President of iHemp Victoria.
Thank you, gentlemen. I now invite you each to make a short opening statement, and after that we'll go to questions from colleagues. Mr Caves, would you like to start?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to appear. I am the President. I'm also Managing Director of Textile and Composite Industries, the company that manufactures the world's best hemp decorticator in Geelong. It was founded in 1994, and the AIHA was founded 11 years ago in 2015. I am passionate about industrial hemp. I come before you, therefore, with a very simple message. Hemp's time is here. Right now, Australia grows less than 5,000 hectares of industrial hemp. Yet with the implementation of our recommendations to this inquiry, we can expand this to grow 1 million hectares by 2030, turning hemp into one of Australia's most powerful economic and environmental engines. Why does this matter? Because industrial hemp offers 11 clear, proven solutions to big problems that benefit our planet and strengthen Australia's economy. It sequesters up to 20 tonnes of CO2 per hectare. It produces real biofuels, ethanol from the stalk, biodiesel from the seed, reducing our dangerous dependence on imported fuel and reducing harmful emissions, and that fuel issue is front and centre of government considerations right as we speak. Hemp creates healthier, energy-efficient hempcrete homes that can help build the 1.2 million new dwellings Australia needs, overcoming raw materials shortages and cost blowouts. Hemp replaces imported cotton and synthetics with durable, antibacterial, low-waste textiles. It regenerates soil, provides high-protein food and animal feed, and it can generate extraordinary profits for Aussie farmers. In short, hemp can deliver net zero outcomes, new regional jobs and massive import replacement. Please note, import replacement opportunities, all while creating entirely new value-adding industries here in Australia. But we are being held back by unnecessary red tape, outdated regulations and a lingering failure to distinguish between industrial hemp from high THC cannabis. Governments and large companies still greenwash while ignoring hemp's potential. That's why the AIHA urges 5 immediate clear steps. Number 1, remove all unreasonable regulatory impediments. This includes the requirements of the Office of Drug Control to regulate the exports of hemp fibre, and there's some horror stories around that. The failure of Australia's ACCU scheme, the Australian Carbon Credit Union scheme, to properly include the sequestration benefits of hemp, and the ODC's interpretation of the UN-style convention that is then imposed unfairly on the industry. Second, stop greenwashing and demand truth from corporations. Thirdly, encourage and support investment funds and superannuation into hemp projects. Fourthly, give preference to hemp products in government procurement, especially uniforms for first responders and defence forces. And fifthly, educate the public accurately so that consumer demand drives supply. As consumer demand increases, supply will increase. Senators, Australia has the land, the climate, the research capability and the entrepreneurial spirit. All we need now is the political will to let hemp flourish. Hemp's time is here. Let's make it happen. I urge you to do what you can to make it happen. I look forward to the most difficult questions you can possibly ask me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Christie.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Senators. Thank you for allowing this moment myself. Just a quick brief. Why hemp now? Industrial hemp. Yes, they've probably covered most of the bases as we speak. Industrial hemp is a low impact opportunity to strengthen the Australian agriculture, manufacturing and regional economies and climate resilience if the capability barriers are addressed. Hemp is already legal. Australia has the strong agronomic suitability for existing regional capacity hemp, directly aligned with regional transition, circular economy and low carbon construction priorities. Contribution to Australian farming capability with existing agriculture, hemp fits seamlessly into broad acre rotations. When I say that, legumes, pasta, etc. The use of the standard machinery, seeders, harvest and with minor adaptations, suitable for regions transitioning from forestry and other declining land uses. And when I say forestry, the timber industry in Victoria is null and void at the moment. When I talk about we transition from, say, hemp into timber, there was 417 mills from Pakenham to Warbot in the early days, all cultivating timber and putting it into building products. So that's probably where most of my work goes into. When I talk about soil health, we're doing progress reports down there at Lardner Park, not using chemicals, pesticides or anything like that for biomass. The point of the committee is high mitigation crop for farmers facing climate volatility and market pressures at the moment. So I can see that being a great contribution. When I say contribution to the circular economy, full plant utilisation, fibre, textiles and composites. We've been doing studies and we are aligning with India and China at the moment. We've sent fibre over at different stages and they have come back with they would, if we could supply as an export market, they'd take 500,000 to 600,000 tonnes a year just of the fibre itself. Construction materials are the herds of timber replacement, housing, poultry farms and animal bedding. As a few points have already been made, antibacterial component in that for the poultry farmers. There is issues out there at the moment with that. The environmental outcomes, it's all biodegradable plants, long life products, sequester carbon, reduce landfill and fossil-based imports. Other points, the platform crop is a circular manufacturing, not a niche product. Contribution to the construction industry, hemp-based building materials, like I said, timber replacement, fibre insulation, panels and composites. Now, this is where our industry can head and it can head on volume scales.
Good.
Barriers, I think the lack of standards and codes at the moment. We've got to sort of strengthen that and get it into the fast track it as quickly as we possibly can. Opportunities to rebuild offshore processing. We have that opportunity. That's all about investment. Bioplastics and composite. It will replace petrochemical-based plastics, applications in automotive, packaging, insulation, consumer goods, food, health products. There is a bit of a overseas export market coming in, and I think that's a bit of a problem with our industry at the moment. It will enable value-adding farms, not just commodity export. Contributions to the Australian economy, jobs and regional development, labour intensive across farming, processing and manufacturing, strong alignment with the forestry transition region, especially in the Gippsland region, and clear pathways for skills to transfer. Export, premium food and fibre and building materials, we probably have that opportunity. Strong interest in Asia and European markets, like I've said. Australia is well positioned to qualify that in the future. I think the biggest problem we've got at the moment is, from what I can see, is probably manufacturing plants. processing the raw materials, and that's where my company sort of sits at that gateway at the moment, being able to sustain volumes and get them into marketplaces. The markets are there. There's probably 3 companies in Victoria that could probably use 35,000 tonne of just herd alone to value add into their own product line. Fibre, there's a company that could use the fibre into a building product instead of using MDF fibre. That company there in Victoria alone could probably use 15,000 tonne a month. And this is all our research has been about over the last sort of my research 15 to 20 years, trying to understand that the building industry is vulnerable at the moment, and with hemp being processed into products is now at a time where it can change into the system. Final message, I think the industrial hemp is ready to be constrained with the modest regulatory reform and targeted capability investment, and can become a mainstream contributor to the Australian agriculture and manufacturing regional resiliences. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Christie. I might just start in terms of the some of the regulatory elements that you spoke about, or both of you actually, so the question can go to both of you. In terms of things like the AccuStream and the opportunities that sit there, are you aware of any work that's been done in the development of a methodology that might incorporate
Certainly, yes.
these products?
So AIHA did a detailed submission of many pages on the December the 8th, 2025 to the AccuScheme Review public consultation. And in that are the huge amounts of data about the scientifically accepted measurement bases on which hemp sequesters carbon. And the AccuScheme ignores them all. Carbon Futures has done some great work with the industry, and it has developed a tool called TerraTrack to enable farmers to measure the carbon inputs and sequestration. And the data is clear and nothing has happened. There's been Accu refuses to properly treat industrial hemp, despite most countries around the world accepting the wonderful sequestration benefits of it. And in particular, product sequestration, because Accu says we're not going to take into account carbon credits unless it's a permanent plant. It's a ridiculous model.
So,
like a tree, but in fact, when you think about it, senators, there's hardly a permanent plant on the planet. In fact, I can't think of one.
Well, everything has its life cycle, I suppose, and it depends on what you're talking about in the context of the life cycle of the various plants. And for some things, like, for each of them, there is, so let's go to trees, there is an artificial life cycle, I think, that's put into the system by the Accu, which may be, say, 25 years, for example, which a hemp plant wouldn't have.
That's correct.
And so, therefore, it's not just about the plant, it's about the downstream product.
Yes.
And we could have a conversation about this forever. But so you've done some work in relation to the attributes of the plant, but there's still work to do with respect to the development.
No, there's a lot of.
Hang on, I haven't finished my question.
Sorry.
With respect to the development of a methodology, which is what actually recognises the attributes of any particular sequestration method.
No, the methodologies have been submitted to Accu. There are methodologies that are well accepted around the world.
Okay, so what jurisdictions utilise those methodologies?
Off the top of my head, I don't know, but I'll be delighted to.
I'm happy for you to give us that on notice, because that would be of use to us.
Yes, terrific. Will do.
Okay. Do you have anything on that, Mr. Christie?
Yes, I did a lot of work with Melbourne University at one stage. They got a grant for that sort of carbon sequestration, looking at the plant. Right at this particular moment, we're working with Victoria University on the same model, and probably proceeding into the sequestration into building products from the plant. So there's a bit of work being done. That's another model. You know, there's so many people out there working on that program, but the truth, who's right, who's wrong in the end, these models will probably, the model we're working on will go into the building product line and housing.
Yeah, okay.
For offset to carbon.
Okay. So differentiating between the plant in the field and or stored carbon that might remain from soil contribution to the building stream, which is what you're talking about, and the carbon sequestered in a building product and then stored in a piece of infrastructure.
Correct.
Okay. You talked about the UN Convention interpretation, which we, I think from memory, had some discussion about with industry at our hearing in Tasmania. That, from my recollection, has some implications for other industry sectors. How do you see we manage that issue without impacting on other industries that have significant value in the economy already? And as a Tasmanian, and Senator De Luca will be sensitive to that as I am, I'm very specifically thinking of the potential impact on the poppy industry, because the convention is about the interpretation of drugs, and which we're looking to make a fairly critical change in the interpretation of that convention, which may have other side effects.
And which has been recommended by the EU to change that interpretation of the 1961 Single Convention. So let me bring to your attention or remind you of something that you would have seen, which was on the 25th of October 2023, the ODC wrote to the Tasmanian Department of Natural Resources and Environment, and in that letter the ODC stated that all extracts from the hemp plant are controlled under the UN Single Convention and may only be used for medical or scientific purposes. That letter from an assistant director has become the de facto position of the Australian government on whole plant hemp. It's been communicated to the APVMA, the Australian Pests and Veterinary Medicines Authority, as you know, and the Australian Veterinary Association. It's shaped the position of every downstream regulator, and it has had real and immeasurable consequences, including an APVMA public statement that the AIHA formally complained about, and that the APVMA subsequently withdrew or corrected on the 1st of May last year. So this statement made by the ADC is quite inaccurate. The World Health Organisation's Expert Committee on Drug Dependence, the very body that advises the UN on drug scheduling, has formally recommended that preparations containing predominantly CBD, or making the distinction between CBD, THC, and no more than 2,000 parts per million of THC should not be under international control. So we can do a submission of, I didn't want to, that you said don't give you any more materials, but we can expand on this as well. We've got a beautiful letter to you that I think will help in your thinking around this issue.
Well, it is a critical issue because I could be provocative and say that the European Union would love to break Australia's dominance of the global opiate sector, and so I don't discount a political element to what the European Union are recommending, because the Spanish in particular are players in the global opiate sector, and I think Australia has something of the order of 50% of the illicit opiate market, and others would like to breach that, and if they could accuse us of breaching an international treaty, that would be pants down for so.
But it was the WHO that recommended this.
So in that context, as a Tasmanian senator, being the home of the Australian opiates and poppy industry, developed here in this country and of significant value to the economy of the country, but also our home state. I'm speaking for Senator Leaguer at the moment. I don't want to give our friends in Europe any excuse to pull our DAX down, if you like, in respect of the poppy industry, and I won't. I'm happy to receive information with respect to it. So, a further submission, question on notice, if you like, a submission on notice would be useful to the committee.
So what we'll do is the AAHA will send to you a letter that we're sending to the ODC, and we'll send that to you and explain the relevance of how we see that the extracts issue to be properly handled.
Okay, that's fine. That deals with that particular matter. You mentioned an item at the beginning, and I didn't finish writing my note down, with respect to export.
Import replacement.
Yeah, okay, import replacement.
So if we look at import replacement, take the top 10, 15 Australia's top 20 imports, and I've done this for all Pacific Island nations. That's also what's very exciting, Senators, that Australia can become a leader, because one of the great challenges for island nations that we want to have relationships with is growing their own economy. And hemp is the magnificent plant for each island nation. I've done the analysis for Vanuatu, for Cook Islands, for even Nauru can do a manufacturing facility, and Fiji. So this opportunity to grow hemp and then, here's the point, not export, but to do import replacements. I've done the analysis, and hemp can replace 4 of the top 10 imports in all of those island nations, and similarly for Australia. So, Senators, this is a real opportunity for Australia, through the work of our farmers who have proven their capability of growing this, to reduce our import levels by generating jobs here, including importing fuel.
Okay. There was a point that was made with respect to biofuels.
Yes.
And I think both of you made mention of it. I was just curious to see where it sits in comparison to other biofuels that are currently in the market. There is quite a significant biofuel industry here in Australia already, based on other commodities, if you want to call them that.
Yes, there are 2 types of biofuels: the ethanol from the herd, and herd is cellulose. So after decortication, the fibre can be used for other matters, and it could also be. You can also produce ethanol from waste mass, for example, from the medicinal markets. But from efficiency and profitability for farmers, the herd used for ethanol and the seeds pressed for the oil becomes biodiesel. The economics of doing that stack up well compared to corn. It's quite a simple digestion process for the herd and the biodiesel, and the numbers suggest that combined herd and biodiesel per hectare from a fibre crop in the realms of 1,000 to 1,100 litres per hectare. So if we had a million hectares of hemp growing, we could do some serious damage. And in fact, if we were doing biofuels seriously, it would lead to much greater production, and that would then have a spin-off, perhaps from great fibre utilisation. Okay. So the numbers, and the cost of producing, I don't have precisely because the technology keeps advancing, but there's some globally available material on producing biodiesel and ethanol from plants.
Okay. Mr. Christie.
Yes.
I was asking you the same question.
Yeah, look, Charles is covering a fair bit of the issues that we face anyway. Just from that diesel plant or biofuel plant, it's a $65 million plant that when it's up and running, it has to consistently be running 24/7. We've already gone down a program with that in Australia at the moment, and we're working on some of those issues to see if it's viable.
Okay. So I suppose the question that I was at in terms of its comparison in an economic sense with other forms of biofuel, not hemp-based, but other established, it is comparable in terms in cost. Yeah, okay.
And it's interesting to note, Senators, that just last week, I didn't bring the paper because I didn't want to burden you down with more papers, but in the US there's been an increased requirement for adding biofuels to petrol and diesel in the American market. I'm sure you've noticed that in the journey.
Senator Dluga.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for coming along today. I have a couple of lines of questioning today for you, but I wanted to start by drawing your attention back to our hearings that we had in Longford a couple of months ago. I can't believe we're in April already now. Andy Lucas, who is the president of the THA and the CEO of ex-hemp, raised some concern with the committee about the hemp industry being able to organise as a group, and I'll sort of paraphrase some of the evidence that she gave to the committee. She said she feels that over the last decade there's particularly been a real demonstration of a lack of ability within our industry as a rapidly emerging sector, and I paraphrase. In her personal opinion, and not as in the role of the THA president, is that they need some sort of external intervention to assist the merging of two rival national peak groups and two rival peak groups in Victoria and New South Wales. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about how you see Ms. Lucas's evidence, because she's said in there that she believes that there has been there's been lost opportunities, that there are multiple multiple voices at a table, which is slowing down the ability for the industry to be able to be effectively represented. I wanted to, and I'll ask the next witnesses, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk to that, if you might, Mr. Cadet.
Excellent, Senator. Excellent question. I reject those assertions entirely. I reject them 100%, and I do so by first giving you a metaphor that what we have is two players in a football club, in a football competition, and with Tasmania's position on the AFL being a very interesting one, the Australian Hemp Council and the Australian Industrial Hemp Alliance, we were founded 11 years ago, a long time ago. It's like two football teams competing in the same space. I have asked AgriFutures, I have asked everybody, tell me what the downside is. We've got two groups of volunteers, none of whom are paid. By the way, there are over 15 agricultural bodies in this country. No one can give me any evidence whatsoever, and I invite you to tell me if there is any evidence of any specific harm caused. They're just broad generalisations. We have two groups of people playing in two different football clubs, all pursuing the same thing, and I know of no significant policy difference between the AIHA and the Australian Hemp Council. So I reject the assertion that having two national bodies causes any harm to this industry.
Okay, thank you. I make no judgment. No, there was just evidence that was provided, and Ms. Lucas is quite respected within the Tasmanian industry, and I wanted to get your thoughts on those as we consider how we progress. Yeah, Mr. Christie, did you want to respond at all?
Yeah, I sort of agree with Charles in that respect. From the start that I actually thought these national peak bodies, one was going to represent farming, the other one was going to represent medicinal in those pathways. And the same with the Victorian Association. But really, at the end of the day, we're all just out there advocating to get this across the line. So, you know, at the end of the day, I set up the Global Hemp Summit for Christmas at Lardner Park and invited every state representative, every national peak body to this conference, and we had a great turnout of 75 people all contributing and trying to get this industry over the line. So I can't see any sort of discrepancies between any of these associations at the moment, but it's still driving down the right pathways. And
so Ms. Lucas was asking for some sort of national intervention, and there wasn't specific in the recommendation of her submission, but you don't believe that's necessary, and you don't believe that the different peak bodies are competing per se. You believe there's a level of that is there is collaboration and cooperation. Absolutely.
But Senator, when I look at the plant itself, just take one stalk itself. I believe to come off that plant, the diversifications and where the directions go, it's huge. So the contribution to each association of these peak bodies is where we're sitting at the moment for all that information. Like involving Melbourne University, Latrobe, Victoria University. There's so many different pathways that have to be dusted to and find out not correct answer, but how we actually can get this industrial hemp into the economy sooner than later. That's what I see.
Okay, no, thanks. I just think it's important that everybody has an opportunity to contribute so the committee understands how the industry does see itself, like after that evidence. But I might just go to Mr. Kavess on another line now about your involvement with AgriFutures and the Australian Industrial Hemp Strategic RD&E plan. What was your group's involvement in that project, and what's been the experience of the National Industrial Hemp variety trials?
It has not been extensive. We've monitored carefully. One of our Vice President, James Vosper, is on one of the committees of the hemp variety trials, the HVTs. Yes. We support the work that AgriFutures is doing. It is our considered view as a body that there's been plenty of R&D done now, and that's why our recommendations do not require more research and development from government. There's been wonderful support from AgriFutures and from the government to those steps that have been taken, and it's our view that industry is now capable, the beneficiaries of the hemp plant expansion, they can fund any specific R&D that is required. So we're supportive of that work, and we're grateful for the support. And it's now time to stop doing relentless R&D. I'll give you an example of this, of the R&D trap, and that's Poland. And Poland has a hemp research institute that was founded in 1930. Right? 1930, and the leader of that is globally renowned around the world for all this knowledge around hemp. Last year, Poland, a nation of 55 million people, grew 1,800 hectares of hemp. That should have been 1 million. And the reason is because the farmers don't know where they're going to sell what they grow. And that's the essence of what this inquiry, the importance of this inquiry is to understand the amazing opportunities, and then that will drive farmers growing because they know where it's going to sell, and that will drive money into solving the R&D problem so that doesn't fall on government's shoulders. Subject, of course, to the government's wonderful R&D incentive scheme. I think it's a 43% kickback, but that applies to all industries.
Yes. And going on to that 1 million hectares, your submission, you set out a vision of 1 million hectares of hemp under cultivation in Australia by 2030.
That's correct.
And the current plantings are at 5,000 hectares. How do you see us getting to 1 million hectares in the next 4 years, 5 years, 4 years? And you project that there'll be almost 29,000 jobs and 9 separately owned manufacturing centres. Have you done any feasibility work on those 9 centres, or are these figures indicative at this stage?
The figures are indicative at this stage. The growth will come from offtake agreements, and I urge you as senators to contemplate hemp as the mining industry, so that people like Darren, the company that I'm managing director of, started in 1994, Textile and Composite. So it's been a 32-year journey. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was the founder of TCI, Adrian Clark, who got Jeff Kennett in Victoria to allow the first trials of hemp to happen in 1996-97. Offtake agreements are the answer. In other words, farmers will grow anything that they can see that's going to be profitable if they know where they're going to sell it. And what we are doing as an industry body is driving to create end buyers and to sign contracts. And my recommendation to the government is that all first responders, national and in the states, I know we're in a national inquiry, should give priority to hemp uniforms. And if that one decision were made in Australia, this would have a global ripple effect, I assure you, Senator, we've got the textile capability. Geelong is sitting there ready, willing and able to produce these textiles. And the argument is either hemp clothing is more expensive. And my answer, our industry answer to that is compared to what? And I point out that the waste, the environmental impact of cotton and synthetic textiles is the second or third highest in the world, and countries are drowning in waste textiles. That can all be changed magnificently. So offtake agreements mean that we've got signed contracts from government and from major corporations, and then we go to the farmers and say, grow. And we know in Australia the farmers can grow. And right now, last night I was at a function with one of the heads of the grains industry. So I think you might know the answer. 22 million hectares of grain is being produced in Australia. 1 million for hemp is small beer in the capability of our farmers.
And the feasibility work at the moment, have you started on that, have you? Or have you done a feasibility study? Or
Senator, my game plan is this. Investors want to invest in hemp. This industry needs investment. I do not want it from government. I want it from private investors, from investment funds, from venture capitals, from impact investors, from environmental investors. It's in our recommendation. Those investors say, where is the market? They know the benefits, they understand it, so where are we going to sell it? And when that money, and the two elements that stop them are market demand and regulatory uncertainty. That's the other reason why we're focusing. This triangle, we will get the investors if they know where the end product is going to be sold and if the regulatory environment doesn't unfairly burden this industry.
And just finally, in your submission, and pretty much every other witness who has been before us has been talking about harmonisation of regulation. What's been your experience engaging with states and territories so far over the matter? Like, are they for a federal? I don't want to say the word takeover, but are they for the Commonwealth Government to make a national regulation? Like, not very often states want to hand over control or powers. What's been your dealings with the states and territories?
I think our problem is bureaucrats from different government departments having internecine wars. I'm the chairman, I'm the executive board of the Federation of International Hemp Organisations. AIHA is a founding member. I have 6 meetings a week on the global situation on harmonisation of rules. The UNCTAD report, Commodities at a Glance, to which you have been referred, talks about recommendations. The Federation has a list of 24 submissions. I'll send these to you as to what we think sensible policies would be. The issue of state and federal bureaucrats and keeping patches, we have a problem. That's why the ODC is a problem. That's why the APVMA is a problem, because bureaucrats don't seem to want to give away jurisdiction. The industry knows what should happen, and then the fights, the industry agrees on what should happen, what sensible regulation is. We're not saying anywhere, in terms of THC, we're not changing any of the globally accepted rules. The question is, how can this inquiry make recommendations or pathways to say, if the ODC says something that's contrary to what the Department of Agriculture says, how do we resolve those disputes? That's what my recommendation would be. How to find a pathway to solve these turf wars. And by the way, the other metaphor for two national bodies, I was thinking of boxing, how many global peak bodies there are in international boxing. So we're all used to it as a society. So I would love a pathway, if ODC is unreasonable or APVMA, is that somehow there is a bureaucrat resolution process.
All right. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Can I just make a little bit of a contribution to that, what Charles has said?
Certainly.
I'll just go back a step. Yes, farming, yes. As soon as there's some off-take agreements, I totally understand what Charles has said as well. We can't make any off-take agreements to India or China at the moment for fibres we've processed here on a mate till we get the bottleneck processing facility. And I'll go back to, the timber industry when they had, 400 plus little timber mill contributing to the economy on timber and building and paper and everything else like that. Where the problem lies is getting the fibre to a stage as we go through the decortication system that I've actually got as well. We need to open the fibre. We can create more money to export markets at some stage, but it's the processing facilities that is actually holding us up. Logistically wise, we probably need 10 in each state, for our farmers. But once the processing plants are established properly to open up the fibre, and like I said before, we've got markets in Victoria that take over 100,000 tonnes of just the herd into their product line. The fibre into insulation bats, keep that market alive. And insulation bats is where we can actually create a market for an offset anyway, off-take agreement as well. Once again, it's a bottleneck. We're in a bottleneck in this industry. Everybody's working together, creating the industry, but it's the processing. The processing is a problem. Major problem.
And can I add one other, Darren, please? And that is that the ODC also purports to regulate the export of the fibre that Darren's talking about. And Margaret River Hemp Co in Western Australia was delayed for 9 months in exporting a 40-tonne container of processed hemp fibre after decortication to China. 9 months to get the ODC to give a licence to export fibre of industrial hemp of less than 1%, and we would love to submit details of that. It had a huge impact, and Hemp Homes Australia in Western Australia is recognised, has built numerous homes, and it just damages our export capability, which again is attractive to our farmers. And Darren will confirm this from his evidence given today, that the Chinese are unable to grow the hemp fibre that they need. They don't have the land availability.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you. That's helpful.
So just one more comment. The building industry, the contributions to Hemp Creek, we've got panels now that are low-bearing panel. We've got first around the world that are actually low-bearing panels to create low-cost housing. We've got problems out in the industry where we need actually hemp to be pushed through the system as quick as we can, building codes, etc., and we can get the cost of housing down to build housing. And it's a fact. That's part of my program.
The committee was very excited, especially the first timers like myself, when we did the tour, and we've seen firsthand the benefits and the opportunities of hempcrete. So appreciate your evidence, Mr. Christie.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't think Senator Cadell has any questions. You've got some homework, I think.
No, I'm
for
good, Chair. I'm fine. Yep.
Homework. I'm going to send you the methodologies used globally, the Federation of International Hemp Organisation policies, and also the letter that AIHA is sending to the ODC on this issue, and we'll send a letter to you, those three things.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for evidence. You know what your homework is. If we can have that by Friday the 8th of May, please. So thank you both.
Would the fourth be, I think 2 pages on Margaret River Hemp Co in the ODC would also be helpful. Can I add that to the homework?
If you want to send us some additional information, that's fine.
Great.
Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Coves and Mr. Christie, for your evidence today. We've established the homework date. Thank you for taking the time to make your submission and for appearing here today. We'll now move on to our next group of witnesses.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
I now welcome Mr. Matthew Latrobe. I hope I've got that right.
Yep.
And Mr. David Bryan, representing first representing the Australian Hemp Council, and Mr. David Bryan, representing the Victorian Hemp Association. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Yep, thank you. I'm Mr. Matthew Latrobe. I'm the President of the Australian Hemp Council.
And David Bryan, President of the Victorian Hemp Association.
Thank you both. Thank you for your submissions and appearing here today. I invite you to each make an opening statement, and then we'll go to questions from colleagues.
No problem. Good afternoon, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to appear today. My name is Matthew Latrobe. I am the President and speaking on behalf of the Australian Hemp Council, the national peak body representing Australia's industrial hemp industry. We appreciate this inquiry because it presents a genuine opportunity to move beyond fragmented discussion and towards practical national framework for industry development. Our submission, with collaboration of those who wish to be represented by us, was built on a simple premise. Industrial hemp is not a fringe issue. It's an agricultural, manufacturing and economic opportunity that Australia has been slow to unlock. Industrial hemp sits at the intersection of farming systems, regional development, low-carbon manufacturing, circular economy outcomes, and sovereign capability. It has the potential to contribute across fibre, food, construction materials, biomaterials, research, and emerging industrial applications. Yet despite this potential, the sector remains constrained by regulatory inconsistencies, policy ambiguity, and the absence of coordinated national support. The Australian Hemp Council has centred its submission on practical reform. First, Australia needs a clear federal legislated definition of industrial hemp based on cannabis sativa containing less than 1% THC. Without that clarity, businesses, growers, regulators, investors, and export partners are forced to operate across inconsistent definitions and compliance settings. Second, industrial hemp should be removed from the National Poisons Framework and regulated as what it is, an agricultural commodity. Keeping hemp tied to narcotic-style treatment continues to create stigma, delays, administrative burden, and misplaced compliance hurdles that are inappropriate for a lawful industrial crop. Third, government procurement must play a role in creating market demand. If Australia is serious about low-carbon materials, regional manufacturing, and circular economy outcomes, hemp-based products should have a fair pathway into public infrastructure construction, and innovation programs. Beyond this, the sector also needs fairer commercial access, better input in R&D pathways, and integration into broader government strategies across climate, manufacturing, agriculture, and regional jobs. At its core, this inquiry is simply not about hemp. It's about whether Australia is prepared to support an emerging industry with the policy settings needed to scale responsibly. Our position is that the opportunity is real, the barriers are identifiable, and the reforms are achievable. We are not asking for special treatment, we are asking for fit-for-purpose treatment. With national consistency, agricultural oversight, procurement support, and coordinated policy reform, industrial hemp can become a meaningful contributor to Australian farming, manufacturing, exports, innovation, and regional resilience. Thank you.
Mr. Bryan?
Matt pretty well summed everything up there. I'll just give a little bit of a background about myself. Grew up on a farm, very interested in agriculture. I have a hemp building company that probably I think I'm the largest hemp building installer in Australia, working on developing panels, including sound barriers as well, and very involved with the Victorian Hemp Association and have been for a long time, and been an advocate for all areas of the industry and working just to develop different facets of the industry tied in with universities and research and things like that.
Okay. All right. So I might start with that construction element. We've had a bit of discussion today about the standards for hemp products. What work is being done on developing those standards, or is it is the production of product a little bit nascent yet to have got down that path? But how important will those standards be in driving the development of the products into the market?
I should also say I'm on the committee for Standards Australia to get hempcrete as a part of the National Construction Code.
Yep.
So currently at the moment, every hemp-related building needs a performance solution report done. So that's done by a third party to say that hemp will perform to the standard required, and it's more about water resistance. So it's actually more to do with render than the hempcrete.
Yeah, okay.
Apparently,
so it's how it fits into the national code as in a performance sense
That's right.
is the
because
word.
it's not actually in the code at the moment.
Yep.
The surveyors can't tick a box, and that's what they want. They just want to be able to tick a box. Apparently,
So it's about the external treatment rather than the product itself.
That's right, because a render is not in the National Construction Code either. And part of the reason hemp comes into it is it's a monolithic product generally, whereas all other rendered bricks have a cavity, so moisture technically can't penetrate right through the wall. So they just need to ensure that there's enough water resistance. So we're working on getting hemp in the National Construction Code, and now, well, our first committee meeting is in a few weeks, so it's still early stages of that whole process. And that will tie in with standards of the binder, the actual herd standard itself. You talk about seed crops for hemp, so the herd on those crops isn't as good a quality, hasn't filled out enough, so potentially isn't as useful for building, or may not be useful for building, so that they'd have other uses like pet bedding and things like that. So we're just working with overseas standards as well, and incorporating them into our own standards.
So what is the volume of overseas standards in relation to these products that may be, well, if we're developing standards here in Australia, that they might be aligned with or otherwise?
As far as I know, Australia doesn't take a direct overseas standard. We almost have to repeat the process, as far as I understand. So otherwise we could just adopt overseas standards directly, especially for the binder, which have their code mark certifications, but they don't. A lot of surveyors in Australia or the National Construction Code don't just accept an overseas standard. I'm not sure why that is, but
different products perform differently in different environments would be.
Well, that's probably
my
true.
instinct.
Yeah.
It's why different agricultural chemicals are rated differently in different parts of Australia or internationally, because they perform differently in different environments. And that has to be tested as part of a regulatory framework. But, sorry, digress.
I've forgotten where we're up to.
No, well, we were talking about the development of Australia's and the capacity for them to be aligned internationally. There is some capacity, but the testing would have to be done to prove up the elements of the international standards at a local level to prove them in our conditions.
That's right, yeah.
Yep, okay.
And as far as things like the panels, for example, where it's sort of more of a purpose-made product, that would be more up to the individual companies to get all the code mark certification, the fire testing and things like that. So I'm not sure if the overall standard could then be overlaid to that panel, but I think because it's a manufactured product, it's a little bit separate, whereas the standards will be more on the in situ hemping, where it's done on site. I don't know if you understand the process much, but it's done with formwork, a little bit like rammed earth. And I think the focus for this standards is going to be on the in situ method that covers that.
But it would also, would it not, specify the mix?
It would specify the mix. Yeah, I don't think it's broad enough to cover both. I will ask that question though, but I do recall something early on saying that the panels weren't going to be included in that. Whether it can be added in, I'm not sure.
Okay. It's starting to, I used to be a builder, so spent a bit of time fighting with the National Construction Code and standards myself. And I'm just trying to think about, in a practical sense, how I might apply that in a direct and practical sense if there are a whole heap of variables that don't come with the process.
I think you're right. If the panel was made, and any blocks as well, or any bricks were made with the same recipe and the same process and mixture, because all it is just, you know, a 100mm panel as opposed to a 300mm in situ wall. It's all the same product. And then apart from the installation of the panel, so the installation would be slightly different.
Well, that would have to meet code specifications as well.
Yeah, which would be testing on a fixing system. So
anyway, so that work is started and
underway.
You're in the frame because you're sitting around the table. Okay, which is good. In terms of the broader regulatory issues that we're dealing with, what are the issues that you're being confronted with respect to the National Poisons Framework?
I'm looking to get some. I'd have to get some proper examples, and I haven't had time to actually write them down. It does come down to individual businesses who have been facing those hurdles themselves. So I'd have to take on notice to actually get that back to you of specific examples.
Okay. And in terms of the definition of 1%, that follows on from, I suppose, the evidence that we've received.
Can I just clarify on the poison thing?
Yep.
Sorry. Now, are you talking about it being linked to the poison?
Yes.
Right. Is that what you're talking?
Yeah, it's like the growing side and what people have to go through to grow hemp.
You weren't talking about actual sprays and...
No.
Okay.
No, that's...
I just wanted to be clear that...
So how it's grown agriculturally and any applications that might be on it would be a matter... Those applications would be licensed under the APVMA.
Which is another issue, yep.
Who would assess each product, each active that's being utilised for application to the crop. It would depend on the crop type, I would have thought, if it was a food crop, withholding periods and all of those sorts of things that might be applicable. And of course, depending on the active, its form and how it might be applied in various environments, because they can vary. So, and that's...
Yeah, if I might add a little bit of a contradictory to potentially what people have been saying. So I do know when it came back in 2017, there were some chemicals that were given approval by the APVMA to be used by the industry to place on the crop. From my accounts and purposes, the APVMA on that specific topic have been quite reasonable. They've obviously allowed us to extend the permits, even though they have requested specific data from the industry that the industry has failed to produce. And I see it as just any sort of standard permit. If they've given you a permit and requested data in return and you haven't provided that within the timely manner that they've requested it, by all means, they have every right to deny it for the next season. Though it is critical to the industry for those chemicals to be available to the farmers who use them, it is on the industry to actually provide that data back. So fortunately, this time around, there was a bit of concern with some of the chemicals not being available for the upcoming season, but the APVMA have been forthcoming and allowed for that to be used with the promise that we'll provide the data that they're looking for within the time frame. So that those chemicals have been included into the AgriFutures AI HPR, so the Australian Industrial Hemp Program of Research, and they are being tested up north. And from the data that is collected from that research will then go to the APVMA that then allows them to give them confidence on providing.
So that's being supported by the work that AgriFutures is doing.
Yes, and that's
collecting that data in an appropriate manner.
Very fortunate that that was something that was added to the end of the project. So the project had already kicked off, and then AgriFutures did make amendments to bring that in. And I guess some of the things I have heard, reading through the transcript and listening to the talks today. So there have been 2 projects that have been run by AgriFutures. So one is the initial one, which is the Industrial Hemp Variety Trial, which was where they took, I think, about 5 or 6 varieties, all the same varieties. One was from a breeder here in Australia, Hemp Farms Australia, located up in Queensland, and pegged them against international Chinese varieties and European varieties. And then they were planted in WA, they were planted in South Australia, Tasmania, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, just to see how those varieties would actually perform in those areas.
Okay. So the 1% is basically a broad perspective across the industry that is where the regulatory framework should sit, rather than the varying numbers that we have from, I think, 3% in Tassie up to 1% in New South Wales.
0.35 in Tasmania, I think, still. 1% is quite a good standard. So where the 0.35% came from, just to go back, I think Paul spoke about it earlier, they asked the French, and a lot of the French varieties were below 0.35. And a lot of the Chinese varieties were sitting on it or a bit above. So the French said to the international regulatory body...
Friends of Europeans again.
So they
I'm going to
basically...
get myself into real trouble here.
Going to cause a diplomatic incident.
Again.
So they set it at that, which basically meant that their seed, they could sell more of their seed. But 1%, most of the varieties grown in Victoria were sitting well below 0.35 anyway. What does happen is when the plant is a bit stressed, whether it's water stressed, it does raise its THC. So at least the regulators are a little bit flexible. So if it's only a little bit over, there's a bit of flex. So 1% does give us that room. The thing that Victoria is wanting to add in, this is the Victorian Department of Agriculture, is, and particularly with plant breeders, so there might be some varieties that have some good characteristics that might sit above 1%, and they're talking about allowing researchers to breed from those slightly higher THC varieties to then breed it down to, I think sowing seed has to be below 0.5 of 1%. So the harvested product can be, as long as it's under 1%, but the sowing seed has to be below 0.5 of 1%.
So is that the content of that seed, or is it the certification number of that seed?
Would have been in the plant, so there's no THC in the seed. It's in the, would have been in the head or the flower.
Plant material around the seed.
Plant material before that seed was harvested. So that's when they would have tested it. So they know that it's below 0.5. So
it's 0.5% in the plant material that the seed is from.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So they're looking at increasing that to allow researchers to work with that material to then breed down a product that's below 0.5%.
Yeah, okay. All right, Senator Lugan.
Thanks very much, and thanks for coming along today. I might just start and ask you both the same question that I asked the previous two witnesses about the industry as a whole organising, and I've come from an organising background myself, so I get it. Things are, can be a little bit difficult at times. But Ms. Lucas had obviously suggested that for national assistance to merge competing or rival national groups and state groups, so there's a consistent voice from the hemp industry. Do you support Ms. Lucas's evidence and submission to our inquiry, or do you have another idea, or do you dismiss it completely?
From a national perspective, I have a different view, very similar. Myself and Andy get along quite well, and I know exactly what she's speaking of. I do believe there is a call to have one body. It allows for ourselves to then, and this is obviously looking down to the future, if levies are ever applied to this industry, it actually allows the industry to, coordinate with those funds effectively. I don't believe, though, there is a need for an outside third party to mediate that. I do believe it's a waste of resources. Fortunately enough, on our side, even though it's outside of AgriFuture's remit, they do work quite closely with myself and Charles to make sure that we are talking, we are obviously collaborating. I guess one of the main items I can see is that whatever initiative we put forward, the other national body has supported, and likewise whatever they put forward, we support as well. One of the most recent ones was, I believe Charles touched on it when it came to the AAP VMA and the use of, hemp oil and I think feeding it to your animals or cattle and livestock. So they obviously put forward a letter to the APVMA, while also the Australian Hemp Council ran a Pause for Wellness campaign, which we provided, scientific data to the APVMA to say, well, why this is unreasonable. And from my perspective, that was a collaborated effort that allowed the APVMA to then slowly make their decision on that matter. So that's where I don't believe we actually do need an external third party. But I do believe we do need to have one national voice. And most recently, I do believe looking for assistance from government bodies like Austrade, they do, not strictly, but obviously do want to work with one body rather than a disjointed one. So I do acknowledge those are potentially the missed opportunities as us as an industry.
Thanks. And from a state perspective, obviously from the VHA, what are your thoughts, Mr. Bryan? You've got thoughts on the national as well, like with the national groups, yeah?
Yeah, I think from an operational point of view, we support what they do, and I hope they support what we do. We have reached out about merging, and that was rejected from the other side. We spoke about an independent human resource type person to pick the best people from both organisations, but we didn't get that far, so that was the plan. I think, it doesn't, I went and spoke at Darren's Global Health Hemp Summit, that worked well, so I think anyone that's promoting hemp is a good thing, and they do things that we might not see that need doing, and we're doing things that they might be doing that they aren't covering. So I think in that way it's sort of covering a bit more, but then I understand from an operational point of view, particularly dealing with government bodies, that maybe one voice is better. I'm not sure how the olive industry evolved. Apparently they had 9 different bodies at one point. I'm not sure if they're down to 1 now, but it's just something that all industries face.
Yeah, and if I can make a couple of comments as well, just like the cotton industry, it took them a while to come together.
And in her evidence, did talk about the cotton industry.
Yeah, fortunately enough, for myself, I I guess, spend a lot of time reading into their history to see how we as an industry can replicate what they've done at a much faster pace. If someone has already done it for us in the past, it's best that we learn from them. I do agree with the comment, though, of what Andy says about communication overhead. Yes. So that's why the strong belief of the Australian Hemp Council is it's a federated model. So we have, unfortunately, we only have 4 voices at the table right now, with Tasmania obviously unfortunately pulling away. Northern Territory, with it being so small and probably only growing 1 hectare last year, don't really contribute too much. With having the key states speaking there on behalf of the people they represent, it allows for items to be dealt with, I believe, a lot quicker. So that's why I do believe the AHC's federated model is best suited to reduce the communication overhead.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. It's good just to get your thoughts for the record about the matter. And I just wanted to ask the AHC about your submission, and you've noted in relation to procurement that you've suggested 10 to 15 pilots for 20,000 square metres of hemp building products in year 1. And I think that was, if I just go back to your submission, that was for the piloting program for schools, social housing, regional health fit-outs, using hempcrete blocks and products.
Yes.
Is there the product available? Say if there was an agency was to come to the industry and say, we're going to go for this. Is there product ready to go, or could it be in a pipeline to be able to pivot to that and get onto it?
So I wouldn't say, and David might have a better idea of obviously being a builder with product in the pipeline, but fortunate enough for myself, I am a business development director of a business called Hemp Inside, and we are a processor located up in New South Wales. And pipeline is one of the biggest items that we always like to communicate to the industry, is to understand when you need the product by, yes, so that we can put hectares into the ground this year.
So if there was a tender process, yes, to come out, like you'd be...
Yeah, knowing that there's a tender process coming out in the next 3 months, knowing that then going through that whole process, obviously it's open for 3 months, goes to the deliberation, then gets awarded. That's probably about 9 months out. It means that come September, we know if the person is successful or someone's successful, how many hectares we need to put into the ground to then meet that demand. I believe, especially if you're growing it for herd, there's no shortage of land or capabilities of making herd for hempcrete products.
Yes, essentially, if you know what you've got up until September, really, well, probably maybe a little bit earlier, just to allow a bit of preparation, but it doesn't take long to get farmers lined up. So you've got a few months to get farmers lined up, and then you've got your product the following March. So, you know, in a large project, that's a relatively short lead time to get, you know, an unlimited supply of volume. So, and in regards to the actual products themselves, it can be adapted very quickly into different products. I know there's people working on a chipboard type product as well. They're experimenting with that. And even just the hempcrete side of things, you know, that can be modified and shaped and things like that. An architect from Brisbane rang a week ago, and there's some big project which I think might be tied in with the Olympics. And, you know, the scales and the sizes, you know, we could quickly modify, you know, the hempcrete to fit that. Yeah.
I think one of the best examples that you are all fortunate being from Tasmania is obviously looking at the UTAS build.
Yes.
How that you expect that normal hempcrete walls are all straight and flat. With UTAS, you've got your nice curved walls.
Absolutely,
so
it's beautiful.
It's quite adaptable.
So you believe, like, if there was if there was a tender process, you know, the industry could absolutely put in and be ready to deliver.
Oh, easily.
Yeah, definitely from a supplier. I think the crunch point for us as an industry would be with what David's working on, is obviously meeting the requirements of the tender to say that it fits the performance, it fits the...
so that's the standards element.
Yeah, the standard things.
Yes. And also, but I might just also ask you the similar question to that I asked the previous witnesses as well about the harmonisation of regulations between the different jurisdictions and how you've dealt with, and any experiences that you've got from states or territories in relation to whether it be the 1% THC, what the willingness has been of states, or do you believe that there's just such unwillingness that there needs to be, the federal government needs to take the lead?
So I've got I guess, both sides of the fence there. There are definitely states who are looking to come to the table and just act first and develop their own industrial hemp act. Obviously, New South Wales went through their task force most recently. Victoria's just recently completed their independent inquiry, and then had I believe we had our first sitting in, was it earlier this year? Yeah, I think it was early in Feb, and then they're looking to publish the results in July. Then obviously Tasmania being the leader once upon a time in that space. I do know, but hate to point up north, but where places like Queensland seem to be very reluctant to do that themselves, and Queensland being Queensland, where you potentially can grow hemp year round, and it is home to where our two breeders in Australia actually reside. And that's where I believe that yes, some states are actually looking to move forward, but then some states aren't. And so if you had a federal framework that then we could go and argue the facts, like, well, the work's already been done for you, it would give them more incentive to actually follow that.
And also Queensland, because of their growing season, we're more of a summer growing down here and in Tasmania, whereas Queensland can grow during the winter quite comfortably. So we could become an all year round supplier to the export market.
And just finally for me, in relation to the AgriFutures investment, what's that delivered for your members and experiences from that?
So I do acknowledge the work that AgriFutures has done, and I believe probably the best piece of work that AgriFutures have put forward is the best management practice manual. That obviously gives anyone who's looking to jump into industrial hemp a document to refer to, and then obviously ask the questions that are relevant to their farm and their situations on how to improve. I do believe the research was started with the best intentions to understand what varieties could be grown and what they should be used for. Myself, coming more from a business perspective, was asking the questions like, what point is there in growing a variety if you don't know what you're trying to achieve? And what's the market asking for? You're better off looking at what the market is asking for than working back and finding the varieties that best suit the market outcome. So yeah, they do play a good part. In summary, that best management practice has been probably one of the most pivotal pieces of documentation for our industry. But yeah, the trials probably could have been conducted a little bit better.
It was great. AgriFutures did the trials. I think that's fantastic. I don't agree with Charles that government shouldn't continue with research. Using the Birchip Cropping Group as an example, which is around Birchip, northwest of Bendigo, they get over $4 million in government funding every year to research grains in that area. And I mean, you could think that, well, we've researched wheat to but they're still discovering new things and new methods. So I see the research as an important thing that needs to keep going as the industry develops. We also don't know what bugs or what funguses might come from multiple cropping back to back, or how long can we grow back to back? Do we have some cross-contamination with different funguses, like with canola? I think that is in Canada, but are we going to have that here? So there's a lot of things. AgriFutures are just scratching the surface, really. Yes. They did do only grain varieties initially. I think now they're moving into fibre. We probably would have preferred if it was the other way around, or they did both. Unfortunately, the food side of things, it's still progressing, but it hasn't it's not a main supermarket item, and not everyone in the supermarket knows that you can buy hemp seed and hemp seed oil. So there needs to be a lot of marketing go into that, but
it's a stigma. It's still like going through breaking a lot of the stigma that's been spoken about. Like I know one of the farmers that we've spoken about, like had barely able to walk more than half across his paddock, and then he said he's having we're not giving medical advice, of course, through the committee, but he's having a teaspoon of his hemp seed oil, and suddenly he's a changed man. So obviously there's a lot of.
Well, it's anti-inflammatory, so that would tie in with that.
Yeah.
Actually, one thing we would really love to see as an industry, speaking of hemp seed oil, is we'd love the term cannabis oil to not exist, because it's technically not an oil. So the cannabis, it's an extract. So you've got, as an example, olive leaf extract, and you've got olive oil. So you've got the oil from the seed and the extract from the leaf, and that's exactly the same with cannabis. So any oil that is with the cannabis extract is another oil. It's olive oil or it's coconut oil. So we're always having to educate people on hemp seed oil is not cannabis oil.
Yes.
That's the first thing they say, is it cannabis oil? So we would love the cannabis industry to refer to it as an extract or a tincture if it's got an oil blended with it, and just lose the oil component. But don't know if government can help do that, but
But yeah, David is right.
Probably can, whether you want them involved or not.
yeah, true.
But David is right with saying that research does need to continue, and it is concerning, and it is something that I have flagged with our AgriFutures representative on what are the next steps for, industrial hemp, and working with AgriFutures if our RD&E plan finishes up next year.
And like research, it's continuing all the time. Like we went to the medicinal, one of the medicinal cannabis plants and seed genetics and everything. It's absolutely, it's happening all the time. Like the research, it's like you said, you shouldn't stop.
And the thing as an industry that we need to do is really encourage farmers, like if they're going to plant a variety, or just put in one strip of another variety, like just see how it goes, because like farmers, especially at the moment, need to be doing their research. I know a lot of farmers just want to come in and go have everything done, but it's going to help the industry if they're prepared to do a little bit of the groundwork as well. So just to throw in another variety and just see how it went in the same conditions is really helpful for the industry. And they might find, wow, that one actually did better. I'll put that one in next year. So
Those agronomics are really important, and I've observed that myself in other sectors. For example, when poppies came to Victoria 10 years ago, roughly, the farmers understanding the agronomics of poppies. I think there was one guy who decided to flood irrigate them. They didn't like that all that much, and so the crop had to be resown, and there were a few other accidents along the way. So the learning of the agronomics is really important, to your point. And so therefore the need for research always continues. And if I think about the development of the poppy industry in Tasmania from what it used to be, where you would walk through a waist-high crop, to something that's probably now only knee-high, the continued R&D of those varieties and the different varieties that are now grown compared to what they were initially.
we're also finding that the thinner stalk has a better quality fibre than the fatter stalk. So some people might be thinking, oh, I'm getting more herd out of the fatter stalk, the bigger the better. But they're also finding that with a higher plant density with the thinner stalk, not only are you getting a better quality fibre for the textile market and to fill that shortfall that China has at the moment, you're still getting the same volume of herd. So, and then if you're harvesting it sooner, if it gets to 2.5 metres and that's, a mature crop, you may be able to grow 2 crops in one season. So, and then maybe do a winter rotation as well. So, and the whole thing with researching, you may be able to be pushing the whole boundary of what's technically considered the growing season, where you might be able to be planting earlier and harvesting at Christmas time, for example, and saving water, relying on spring rainfall. So there's all those types of things, and what sort of rotation crops.
The need for R&D never stops.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just one thing, you did mention the possibility of a levy. What conversations has been had about that?
From, I guess, a national perspective, it's just obviously with agri-futures, because their remit is obviously to get an emerging industry to levied. Fortunately enough, that's where they do introduce us to all of the levied industries, and learning from them to say, well, some people levy their farmers and where they actually collect them. The only item I could possibly say that has been discussed is more than likely, when there is a levy applied to industrial hemp, that it should be applied at the processor, because the processors would technically be the bottleneck of the industry, because all farmers have to go to someone and then get it out, and so the processor would have to collect the levy on behalf of the growers.
I was listening to your commentary and conversation with Senator De Liga in relation to supply, and your capacity to scale up to meet a project. Surely, though, one of the objectives of the industry would be to have a certain scale where there was a constant demand that drove a certain capacity within the industry, rather than having the fluctuations of project-based supply.
The initial focus of the industry will be sort of filling that shortfall in China. As Charles said, they've reached the limit of how much they can grow, and demand is increasing. You've got companies like Patagonia that are getting right into hemp, and other companies will follow as they...
So that generates that base demand.
That's right, and creates that continuity, well, that continuous demand. So then you can follow in and have that continuity of supply. So that will be the main core of it. And to tie in with that, and to tie in with the levies, because at the moment, like a farmer grows hemp, he doesn't really know what he's growing. So he doesn't know if he's got a merino sheep or a Corriedale, or, it's a bit all over the place. So what we've done through the Australian Hemp Council is we've registered Hemp Fibre Innovation Australia, and the idea is that that would become like the Australian Wool...
Australian Wool Innovation?
Yeah.
I hope you don't have the history that AWI's had, but anyway, that's a different story.
Oh yeah, we've been learning about stockpiles. But the idea is that we would get a standard, a fibre testing standard, which Deakin are working towards at the moment. I think they're in the process of buying a final piece of the machinery that would cover the whole spectrum. And the idea is that the levy would go in to help fund that and keep the research going, but that research could also broaden out into the herd side of things, and also even to the growing side, to go right through the whole thing, not just the fibre. So the fibre will be, the textile market will be the initial thing. The other thing that there's a company in Melbourne that are keen to get some hemp to run through their insulation bat making machinery, and that's basically, they can do it. They just want to run it through, make sure all the figures are right, and that it's a competitive product, because as good as hemp is, at the end of the day, it's got to be competitive. It can probably handle 10 to 20% more because of its sustainability, but maybe over that you're starting to reduce.
There's a limit in the market.
Yeah. But I believe that in the whole system, with efficiency in the processing and the growing, and you're growing a lot of it, like it's a very bulky product, that we can compete with fiberglass and polyester insulation bats. So, yeah, well, and that needs to be our focus through the whole thing, really.
And if I may add, that's why one of the core components of our submission was the use of whole plant, because if we're able to use every part of that plant, it means it can bring down the cost of everything else.
Well, that's the economics of the plant. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Do you mind if I just ask one more quick one?
Sure, and then I'm going to give a bit of gratuitous advice.
Okay, no worries. I just wanted to follow on from the supply question about, say, for hypothetical, if there was a tender process and everything, and just so we have on the record from your perspective there, Matthew, how does hempcrete compare in its sustainable and sustainability compared to, say, timber products in the terms of cost of energy efficiency, emissions intensity? What are some of the other benefits that people might not understand?
I guess one of the main ones, and this just comes from my HVAC background, is obviously indoor air quality. Though, to my dismay, there hasn't been much study of putting an IAQ sensor into a hempcrete building to understand how many VOCs or TVOCs there are inside the space. In terms of timber and the sustainability process of that, David would be best to answer that, because obviously being a hempcrete builder.
You probably have to look more. So I see timber as a sustainable product. So, and I didn't really agree with the closing down of the industry, because it was a renewable resource, and but that's done. I think the hempcrete, it's more the other products like the bricks, which are very energy intensive in their production. A lot of brick companies are having a lot of pressure because of gas prices. Some are spending millions of dollars a month on gas bills. As the generation, as the younger generation comes through and they don't want to work like the older generation, bricklayers is going to be a harder thing. Robotics may be able to come into that equation, but that's going to be a factor. So if we can have an like this, where the panels will probably come into their fore, where it can be an automated manufacturing process, and you're putting up a whole panel with two people rather than laying all these smaller bricks. So bricks will always have their place, and hemp bricks will have their place as well. So there's no heated energy required for hempcrete. It's a air-cured thing. The lime that's used in the binder, when it's processed, it releases carbon dioxide, but as it cures, all that carbon dioxide that was released is absorbed back into the wall, and over time the hemp supposedly petrifies, so it becomes sort of like a limestone wall. Matt touched on indoor air quality. A big issue in housing in Australia at the moment, and partly because they're getting a little bit smaller and they're sealing them right up, everything's plastic paint, plastic carpets. The big issue is even just vapour from your breath, there's nowhere for it to go. So the moisture builds up on the wall, and then mould becomes an issue. And quite often it's the mould you can't see. So the reason hemp is so good in that regard is any excess moisture, the hemp absorbs it, and then when the air dries out inside, it then releases the moisture. So that's what the breathability is. It's that vapour permeability. It's moving vapour in and out of the wall, so you don't get excess moisture. And it won't. So it's not supporting mould growth.
So you say, so from sustainability and from the industry perspective, hempcrete and timber live together in a world in which the products coexist. But bricks, for example, this is obviously a new way to build, and it's going to be better than the brick industry for it.
Yep, definitely. And the other thing is, well, they say the only thing certain in life is death, taxes. Well, we've added a third one: rising energy costs.
Yes.
So if you're going to save 80% on your energy bill, plus you've got a more comfortable environment to live in, that's going to be a bigger factor.
So modular housing, for example, would be really well suited for.
And if I may add, for the full carbon cycle of hempcrete, I do believe Tim himself mentioned it in Tasmania. The AHC has also worked with Winton Evers at EcoProfit to obviously get the full life cycle analysis into the full CAM model. So obviously going straight to the ACCUs and saying put our system in, it doesn't work. The process is get it as recognised as a full CAM method, and then the ACCUs can actually acknowledge that as a process to be used. And with your comment to say that hempcrete and wood live together, that's exact same view when it comes to fibres. All natural fibres have their place. Our main enemy is synthetics. So
yeah, we don't demonise cotton. We think cotton has a place. So synthetics is and its breathability. Like synthetics don't breathe. It's the same thing.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for evidence today. Can I say, as someone who sat in a ministerial chair and had to deal with a multiple of industry organisations, having one industry organisation who comes to me to talk to me about what the industry's issues are, so I don't have to go to several different places, makes a huge difference. And the easiest way for a minister to not make a decision is to have a different position from here and a different position from here, and let the industry sort it out before you make a decision. So, I've watched in agriculture over 25 years in politics, a multitude of industry bodies in a sector get nowhere because there's too many different voices, and why would a minister put their backside in a particular sling if there's another person going to bite them from over the other side? And I think horticulture is a great example. I think there were 42 or 43 of them. And trying to get a decision that supported horticulture was always hard because there was always someone who thought they were special. So gratuitous advice, I admit, but just my thought process is on the unity of an industry who's looking to do the things that you're looking to do and we're trying to assist you with. So thank you for your evidence today. If there's anything that you've taken on notice, if we could have that by Friday the 8th of May, we would appreciate that. But we certainly appreciate you taking the time to come and provide evidence to us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Committee stands adjourned. Thank you to Hansard and Broadcasting. Thank you to the Secretariat for pulling it all together. Thank you very much.